At first glance, a ball held by the highest aristocracy looks full of romance and elegance. Newlyweds are dancing everywhere. But in truth, it's also the filthiest kind of social gathering. People gossip behind each other's backs. And sure enough, a few noble ladies have already fixed their eyes on a target. They whispered among themselves, asking if that really was her. How had she suddenly become so beautiful? From today on, they couldn't call her Baroness Aelin anymore. She was now the new mistress of the Myas family, the Duchess of Myas. But no matter how you looked at it, the whole thing felt strange. Everyone knew the young duke had been missing for 5 years already. So how exactly had she gotten pregnant? Even though the old duke had personally acknowledged the bloodline, the rumors couldn't be suppressed in private. The noble ladies grew more and more outrageous, even saying she must have used some crooked trick to deceive the entire ducal house. The waters behind great noble families ran far deeper than anyone imagined. Just as they were getting more excited, the person in question finally appeared. Duchess Isabella coldly spoke up. "What? Is my daughter-in-law's business really that fascinating to all of you?" The moment she appeared, the entire hall fell so silent you could have heard a pin drop. Isabella stared at them and demanded, "So you think the Myas family is easy to bully? You even dare slander the woman carrying the ducal family's own flesh and blood." The noble ladies who had been so arrogant just moments ago were completely terrified now, stumbling over their words as they begged for forgiveness and claimed they had only misspoken. Isabella had no intention of letting them off. She affectionately took Judith's hand and said loudly on purpose, "Let's go home. Don't waste time on these low-class nobodies." That single sentence was like a resounding slap across the faces of those noble ladies. She even added that the Duke was waiting for them and that the baby in Judith's belly should be resting by now. Judith played along perfectly and replied sweetly, "Yes, mother." The two of them walked out of the ballroom in full view of everyone, never looking back. All that remained was a group of noble ladies standing there with ugly expressions, stunned into silence. The women who had been gossiping a moment ago were nearly scared out of their wits. They clutched their chests, shaken, feeling as though the atmosphere in that room had been so oppressive they could barely breathe. Those women really had some nerve, provoking Isabella of all people. The Duchess was famous for her unpredictable temper. If it had been any other time, they probably wouldn't have been able to survive in the Empire anymore. But after this little scene, everyone understood something clearly. For the Duchess to protect a commoner-born daughter-in-law this fiercely, Judith's pregnancy had to be real. But if the child was real, then where exactly was Duke Egan, who had been missing for a full 5 years? In the carriage on the way back to the city, Isabella calmly reviewed the situation. By now, everyone in town should know that the child in Judith's belly belonged to the ducal family. Once Judith had made this public appearance, the cancellation of Egan's household registration, the procedure meant to declare him dead, could no longer go through. Sitting beside her, Judith cautiously spoke up. She said she had been very careful with the clothes and jewelry she was wearing, and that as soon as they returned home, she would immediately return all those valuables to her mother-in-law. But the instant Isabella heard that, her expression changed completely. Staring at Judith, she shot back, "Have you lost your mind?" Judith was utterly stunned. Isabella scolded her irritably. "Do you think the ducal house is some petty family that takes back what it gives away? Even if you're only a contractual daughter-in-law, you still represent the Myas family." Looking at Judith, she added, "That outfit suits you well. Tomorrow, have another one made in a similar style. And when we get back, have a late-night meal prepared right away. Even if the pregnancy is fake, the way you talk is unacceptable, Judy." Judith was left dizzy by that whole barrage of overbearing rich lady lines and could only answer blankly, "Ah, yes. All right." Only then did Isabella withdraw her gaze in satisfaction. Looking at her mother-in-law's back, Judith suddenly felt warm inside. Though the Duchess spoke sharply, every word was her way of caring for her. The more Judith thought about it, the more unreal it all felt. Life was even better than a dream. She had thought she was entering a notorious noble house, but instead, as a contract daughter-in-law, she was living more comfortably than an actual daughter. Thinking back to before, she had spent every day worrying about those absurd debts, chased all over town by creditors. But ever since entering the ducal house, all she did was wear beautiful clothes and live in luxury. Those hard days now felt impossibly far away. Who would have thought it? That terrifying, vicious mother-in-law the outside world talked about so dramatically was actually a Tsundere powerhouse who kept stuffing Judith with good things because she was afraid Judith wasn't eating enough. The people in this ducal house were far better than Judith had ever imagined. As far as contract marriages into nobility went, she felt like she had truly struck gold. Even as she got out of the carriage, Judith was still thinking. This was only a temporary arrangement anyway. Since the real Duke, Egan, was never coming back, then for the next few months, she would simply enjoy being a noble young madam. But right then, a low voice suddenly rang out in the darkness. "You're late." Judith stopped dead in her tracks. There, in the garden, stood the back of a blond man. In a calm voice, he said, "Long time no see." The moment Isabella saw who it was, she froze where she stood. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Egan, is it really you?" The man slowly turned around and called out to Isabella, "Mother." Now this was bad. The man who was supposed to be dead had come back alive. Step by step, Egan walked toward Judith. There was a faint, unreadable smile in his tone as he said, "Then this must be my wife." Judith froze in place, unable to say a single word. "I hear you're carrying my child now." The entire scene turned deathly still. Looking at the man in front of her, Judith had only one thought in her head. How was this possible? In her memory, this man named Eric had clearly died. It was in that very instant, after her gambling-addicted father committed suicide, that she suddenly realized she had transmigrated. Her father had left her nothing but an empty title and gambling debts she could never repay in a lifetime. The moment Judith was thrown out of her home, her life hit absolute rock bottom. Her birth mother took everything of value and ran off with someone, leaving Judith alone to fend for herself on the streets in the middle of the night. But who could have guessed that at her most desperate moment, Judith suddenly remembered something. She had transmigrated into a novel she had read in her previous life, and she had already been living inside it for 17 years. At first she thought she had gone insane, but the clear plot details in her mind were impossible to explain away. She rushed outside like a madwoman, desperate to confirm one thing. Could this world really be nothing more than a novel? The novel Judith was trapped inside was called Flower Blooming in the Ruins. It was about a heroine who lost the only person she could rely on in a fire, yet still remained strong and searched for true love. Judith had thought at the time that if the heroine really existed, then it would prove she wasn't crazy. If she couldn't find her, then she might as well smash her head against a wall and give up for good. She ran desperately through the streets for a long time, and at last, in front of a flower shop, she saw the woman described in the book exactly as written. That was the final proof. Judith stopped running, finally feeling a little more grounded. But before she could feel relieved for long, a new problem surfaced. If the plot was real, then what should a doomed side character like her do next? Judith had finally found that girl, but the instant she saw her clearly, she was completely dumbfounded. The heroine before her was only 12 years old. Judith's mind filled with the original plot. Those scenes pierced her like needles. If debts couldn't be repaid, the girl would have to use her body as payment. She would even be forced to marry an old man 30 years older than her. That was the heroine's fate. Judith jolted awake from the dream. She had originally thought she could endure it, but when the moment truly came, she realized reality was even harder to bear than a nightmare. But she quickly calmed herself down. Sitting there worrying would solve nothing. She held the entire plot of the novel in her hands. Since there was no going back, she had to find a way to turn the story into her own cheat code and use the advantage of foreknowledge to completely turn her fate around. Judith sat down at the desk, preparing to sort through every detail from the beginning. After calculating carefully, she realized the original story started with the heroine's fire at age 15. But right now, there were still 3 full years before the story even began. The plot in between was completely blank. Simply waiting around was definitely not an option. Since the main cast hadn't appeared yet, she could only look for a breakthrough through the villains and side characters. The pen in Judith's hand suddenly stopped. She remembered a key point everyone had overlooked. The most infamous villainous family in the book, the House of Mias. As for Carl, in the original story, he was a major villain with a strange personality. But who would have thought that behind this illustrious ducal family was a complete mess of hidden problems? Back then, Carl's older brother had disappeared unexpectedly, and once the 5-year limit was up, he would be legally declared dead. To preserve the family status, the ducal house randomly brought in a maid as a scapegoat. They lied to the public, saying she was carrying the missing heir's child, and forced her into the position of daughter-in-law in name. But no matter how clever the ducal family thought its scheme was, fate didn't cooperate. Even after the whole fake pregnancy play was carried through, the missing Aegeon still never reappeared, neither alive nor dead. All the pressure and expectations crashed down onto young Carl alone. Growing up in such a suffocating and hypocritical environment, Carl changed completely, transforming from an innocent child into a twisted madman. It turned out Carl had become that future lunatic largely because of that nominal daughter-in-law. That woman abused her status and made young Carl suffer endlessly behind the scenes. Looking at the opportunity before her, Judith suddenly had a bold thought. If someone was destined to fill that position anyway, then why couldn't it be me? Rather than letting that vicious maid ruin Carl, she would personally go to the ducal house and become the contract daughter-in-law herself. The idea was brilliant. As long as she could successfully enter the ducal house, the next part of the story would no longer be left to those villains. Since she had decided to change her fate, then the first step was to earn enough money to survive. Judith planned to use all the plot spoilers in her head as capital to gain a foothold in this world. But there were still 3 years before the ducal house would be looking for someone. In the meantime, she needed to find a reliable buyer and sell her information at a good price. She turned and went to a mysterious intelligence shop. The moment she pushed open the door, the sound of a bell broke the silence in the room. Without even looking up, the man seated behind the desk said, "Welcome to Gray Intelligence." Getting straight to the point, Judith bluntly said she had come to sell information. But the clerk opposite her clearly didn't take her seriously and only wanted to give her a little money to send her away quickly. Judith wasn't having any of that. She insisted on seeing the real owner of the shop. The clerk, however, used the rules as a shield, saying the owner never showed himself. Just as the standoff reached a deadlock, Judith suddenly let out a cold laugh and asked if he thought she was easy to bully because of her age. Before the clerk could react, she threw down her trump card. "That's not very fair, is it? Because as far as I know, your mysterious boss isn't even of age yet either." The clerk froze on the spot. He had never imagined that this seemingly ordinary girl would know something that confidential. Just as silence settled over the room, the door behind them suddenly opened. A masked man walked out, amusement in his voice. He said he had been wondering who was asking for him and hadn't expected such an interesting guest. Smiling, he said, "Then please, this way. I'd like to see what kind of remarkable information you've brought." This intelligence organization called Gray was expanding at an astonishing speed. Its hidden leader was even more mysterious. Unfortunately, in the original story, it would soon be destroyed in a great fire. Even the male lead regretted its disappearance, because the intelligence here was genuinely irreplaceably useful. And I spent 3 years lying low here. "Master, I'm here. Congratulations on officially becoming an adult, Baroness Aelin." "Oh my, how thoughtful. Thank you for the gift." I had somehow become a VIP of the intelligence chief. He even sent me flowers by hand on a private occasion like my coming-of-age day. But one thing was strange. I had never mentioned my birthday. How had he pinpointed it so precisely? As the head of an intelligence organization, something this small is hardly difficult. "Didn't you also know my age, my lady?" That was just a lucky guess on my part. "But how did you know secrets even I couldn't investigate? I've wandered around trying to pay off debts for years. You overhear all kinds of rumors. It's really nothing special. To have accuracy like that, this can't be ordinary information. It seems your abilities are greater than I imagined, my lady." "Then I'll take that as a compliment." Of course, my information was accurate. I had the script of the novel in my hands. Before, I only dared sell trivial little things because I was afraid of changing the course of the future completely. But being able to get close to this leader was the greatest thing I had gained in those 3 years, because only by dealing with him directly could I obtain the highest level secrets. And today was the day I intended to reel in the net. I'm not only here to sell information today, I also want to buy something from you. This is the first time you've asked to purchase intelligence. That sounds very interesting. I'm already looking forward to it. So then, what is it that you want, my lady? That's right. The information I had brought was priceless, perfect for offsetting the price of what I wanted to buy. Egan Myas. What did you say? I want information on Egan Myas. He was the only heir of the Myas family, yet he had suddenly vanished without a trace 5 years ago. Even the original novel never explained where he went. But the Myas family, in order to delay the death declaration, was planning to bring in a fake daughter-in-law. I had to get that position. You mean that young Duke who disappeared 5 years ago and whose life or death is still unknown? It hasn't been 5 years yet, but it soon will be. You should understand the difference. Once the full 5 years pass and he still hasn't appeared, he'll be officially declared dead. By then, it'll all be too late. But why are you suddenly interested in him? I do have a bit of an interest in that young Duke. If I was willing to spend a fortune on information, then obviously I was very interested. I mean that kind of interest between a man and a woman. Cough, what did you say? The kind between a man and a woman? What kind of reaction is that? In your eyes, am I just some woman who only knows how to make money and pay off debt? That's not what I meant. Even this normally composed intelligence chief had managed to choke on his tea. It seemed my excuse had genuinely caught him off guard. That Duke has always been known for being perfect. Is it really so strange for me to be interested in a face like his? As far as I know, that young Duke has never even met you. I only watched him secretly from distance. With my status, I wasn't qualified to officially meet him. But even you know that much. As expected of the head of an intelligence house, it seems you know quite a lot about him. Why did he leave home? Where is he now? Where was his last known location? I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I know next to nothing about his current situation. What? Weren't you just talking about how he never met me? That was all before his disappearance. As for where he went afterward, it's the same no matter which intelligence agency you ask. No one can give you an answer. I've heard the Myas family has also been searching for him regularly. But since there's been no news all this time, perhaps it's time to forget him completely. That may even be what the young man himself most wanted. In any case, the ducal title is still being kept open for him. After all, he used to be an exceptionally outstanding child. That's why everyone has such a hard time forgetting him. Of course, once he is officially declared dead, all of this waiting will come to an end. As for that young Duke, I have no information I can offer you. I am sorry. At that point, he didn't seem to be deliberately hiding anything. A hollow feeling suddenly opened up in my chest. I had thought that becoming a valued client here would let me obtain something definite, but the trail still went cold. If even he couldn't find the man, then how was I supposed to carry out my plan? So where exactly was Egan? If he were still alive, it should have been impossible for him to hide this completely. After all, if you're alive, you have to survive. And if you survive, you leave rumors behind. Yet, even at the end of the original novel, he never appeared. Could he really already be dead? The thought felt awful. Better not think too deeply about it. Someone as exceptional as him must be living well somewhere. As long as nothing unexpected happened before I was officially announced as the fake daughter-in-law, that would be enough. For instance, if he suddenly came back alive, then my whole plan would be ruined. By the way, since you two never even met, how exactly did you develop that kind of affection for him? Even after he disappeared, you kept searching so persistently. Your feelings must run deep. Because he's handsome. That's your reason? I place a lot of importance on looks. Even just seeing him from afar once, he was unbelievably handsome. So before his coming-of-age ceremony, I wanted to know a little more about him. Think of it as a celebration. Since even the chief didn't know, there was nothing more to be done. I'm sorry I couldn't help, but didn't you say you also had information to sell me? That's right. May I borrow a pen? Though this information was extremely valuable, the current situation wasn't favorable for me, so I could only use it to pay my debt. As the pen moved across the paper, the man's expression changed. Is this a map of this district? That's right. You should know where this is, shouldn't you? It's a hidden black market shop. Since you deal in intelligence, you should understand exactly what these coordinates mean. A large amount of explosives has been brought in there. If it isn't dealt with immediately, the whole street will soon be blown flat. You have to act quickly. If you're late, it'll be too late. As for payment for this information, I'll collect it from you slowly in the future. And as for the cost of those flowers, I'll graciously allow you to deduct it from that payment. I'd already told him the news. He should handle it properly, right? If it was that man, then he would definitely be able to deal with that troublesome shop. Actually, before my plan was completed, I really didn't want to interfere too much with the original story. Even the slightest deviation could matter. For the past 3 years, I had clearly possessed all the key information, yet I never used it to make a fortune. That was because I was too afraid of the butterfly effect. If I sold off critical information and caused the plot to change completely, my original plan might collapse all at once. So I had only sold information that wouldn't affect the novel. In the past, I only sold harmless little gossip, like which couple was about to divorce, or had planted rare roses in their garden. But this street fire was a major turning point at the beginning of the original novel. If I interfered, the direction of the plot would definitely spin out of control. Still, I really couldn't just stand by and watch so many innocent people die. Anyway, I was only the Myers family's contract daughter-in-law. As long as my escape plan didn't go wrong, it didn't matter how the plot changed. If I could just hold out for a few more months and end the contract by pretending to miss Scary, then I could take the money and disappear. That way, I'd not only save people, but also lessen the suffering of the heroine. It was a win-win. Yes, that was the best possible outcome for everyone. Tomorrow, I leave. Destination, the Duchy of Myers. Without an appointment, you won't be able to see the Duchess. Even when Judith stressed that it was an urgent matter concerning the young Duke, the butler remained cold-faced. You have only 2 choices now: leave a letter or submit a request for an audience. Of course, the Duchess may not even read your letter. She may even reject your request outright. If I submit it now, when is the earliest I can see her? The butler slowly opened the records and gave an answer that left one despairing. It's difficult to give you an exact answer, but at the very least, you'd have to wait around 3 months. What? Judith was so shocked she nearly went numb. 3 months? By then it would all be over. Apparently, there was no shortage of people pretending to be the young Duke's savior. After all, that kind of lie was the hardest to disprove. As long as they weren't caught on the spot, everyone wanted a share of the benefits. But Judith knew very well she couldn't wait 3 months. If the ducal house brought back some fake bride during that time, then everything would be ruined. The butler tentatively asked, would seeing her 3 months from now be acceptable? Judith flatly refused. Since the other side wanted to drag things out, she could only throw out her final trump card. Listen carefully. What I'm about to say concerns the young Duke. Calmly, Judith said, when the young Duke was little, he hated pomegranates. He thought they looked disgusting. He didn't start eating them until he was 10. The instant those words were spoken, the butler froze completely. How could the woman in front of him know something so private, something only family members should know? Smiling, Judith asked, should I come back in 3 months then? That might better prove I'm the real thing. At last, Duchess Isabella appeared. Without wasting words, she admitted she had heard about the pomegranate matter, but she also laid things out bluntly from the start. She said that right now, she was only willing to waste time because she had no other choice. Hundreds of liars had tried to walk through these doors before, and every single one who lied had met a miserable end. Faced with such naked intimidation, Judith not only wasn't frightened, she smiled even more brightly. She said she hadn't come today to provide clues about the young Duke, but to discuss a deal with the Duchess. Those words were enough to make Isabella lose her composure. Just where did this woman get such confidence? Judith knew very well that one detail about pomegranates wasn't enough to earn the Duchess's trust. She needed stronger proof. So she suggested that the Duchess send someone to the young Duke's bedroom, pry open the brick by the bedside, and retrieve the letter he had hidden there as a child. Judith remained perfectly calm. Once the letter is found, then we can sit down and talk properly. Isabella did not hesitate. She immediately rang the bell and summoned the maid Sarah, ordering her to go and verify it at once. If there's really something there, bring it back exactly as it is. Judith watched the scene, already certain. That letter was originally something villains would have used, but now it would become her strongest bargaining chip. Judith quietly observed from the side. The Duchess, rumored to be cold and merciless, now couldn't even hold her cup steady. It seemed no one could remain calm when it came to their child. Just then, the maid hurried back, truly carrying an envelope in her hand. saying she had just dug it out from a crack in the wall. With trembling hands, Isabella opened the letter. After only one glance, she froze. It was indeed her son Egan's handwriting. The evidence was undeniable. Now she could no longer doubt it. Isabella suddenly lifted her head and stared hard at Judith. "How do you know all of this? Where exactly is my son now?" At this point, Isabella had completely stopped caring about appearances. Clutching the letter, she was even willing to mobilize the entire power of the family if it meant seeing her son again. Looking at the nearly frantic mother before her, Judith felt a little shaken. She couldn't understand it. Since the young Duke had family who cared about him this deeply, why had he run away from home in the first place? Isabella asked urgently, "What do you want? Just say it. I can give you anything." But Judith remained unusually calm. She emphasized once more that she hadn't come to sell information, but to negotiate a deal. Then she struck directly at the Duchess's weak point. "I know your biggest headache right now is how to suppress the matter of your son's death certificate, and the proposal I bring can solve that problem for you." But Judith didn't rush to name a price. She told the Duchess to investigate her background first, and that they could sit down and talk again in 2 days. With that move, she completely seized control of the situation. In the end, Isabella nodded. She agreed to meet Judith formally 2 mornings later. Judith politely presented her contact information and handled everything flawlessly. Only after stepping out through the ducal house's gates did she dare let out a long breath. What had just happened was no joke. If she hadn't memorized the novel's details inside and out ahead of time, she would probably have slipped up already. Still, a doubt stirred in Judith's heart. She had read the original story, yes, but had she really possessed this kind of perfect memory from the beginning? The more Judith thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Ever since she began making a living by selling information, she found that she could clearly remember even the most useless details, as if someone had forcibly engraved them into her mind. As she walked down the street, she heard people everywhere talking about how that alley had nearly been blown sky-high earlier, and how luckily someone had dealt with the explosives in advance. Hearing that, Judith finally smiled. Even if she didn't know how the plot would change from here on, at least this disaster had been prevented. But before she could be happy for long, a voice suddenly came from behind her, asking where she had gone so early in the morning. The one calling out to Judith was none other than the masked man. Standing there like a wall, he blocked the sunlight so completely that Judith almost felt as though night had fallen. He stared at her, his tone faintly scrutinizing, saying that she looked like someone who ought to be asleep, and then demanded to know where she had gone so early. Judith knew she couldn't hide it, so she simply laid her cards on the table and said she had gone to the Myas ducal house. The moment he heard that name, the man's gaze sharpened instantly. He pressed, "What were you doing in a place like that?" Judith smiled. At first, she thought of saying it was a secret, but on second thought, this man would find out sooner or later anyway, so she might as well tell him now. She said she planned to marry into the Myas family. Seeing the man's stunned expression, Judith even added playfully that this was major intelligence, and she was giving it to him for free today. Now the man really couldn't stay seated. Holding his forehead, he repeatedly asked if she really intended to marry into that family. Judith smiled and nodded, giving him a definite answer. "That's right. You heard me perfectly." The man was completely dumbfounded. He hurriedly did the math for her, saying the ducal family's youngest son was only 8 years old, and marrying him would be illegal. Besides, the Duke and Duchess had such a good relationship that the Duke himself would never do anything improper. Judith laughed and waved her hand, saying she intended to marry the missing young Duke, Egan Myas. At that, the man couldn't keep up the act any longer. The words slipped out of him. That man's life or death is unknown. No one can even find him. How exactly are you planning to marry him? Judith's smile only grew wider. Looking at him, she said, "Weren't you just pretending not to know him? So how is it that now you remember his disappearance so clearly?" She told the man to just stand by and watch, not interfere with however she chose to do it, because up until now, her instincts had never once been wrong. Speaking of which, Judith had been a complete oddity since childhood. She always appeared out of nowhere without anyone noticing, could tell people's ages at a glance, and possessed all kinds of remarkably precise information, yet no one knew where any of it came from. People had thought she might become steadier once she came of age, but instead, she became even more outrageous than before. When she used to say she liked Egan, everyone had treated it like a joke. After all, she had never even met the man. But now she was publicly announcing that she intended to marry him, and Egan was about to be officially declared dead. Instead of living a good life, she insisted on becoming a widow. What in the world was going on in this woman's head? The more the man thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. Marrying someone who wasn't even present? It didn't sound like anything normal. He was sure Judith had some motive. Though she often acted unconventional, she definitely wasn't the sort to commit fraud. And the Myers family was no soft target either. Who would dare stir up trouble on their territory? But if it wasn't for money, then the whole matter made even less sense. Why insist on marrying that young duke? There had to be an even bigger secret hidden behind this marriage. Now, this was interesting. The man directly removed his disguise. So, how exactly do you plan to marry me? It turned out he was the very same young duke, Egan, who had supposedly disappeared and was on the verge of being declared dead. In the eyes of the Myers family, I was the young duke, but the true heir should have been Carl. So as not to stand in his way, I left home completely before even coming of age. As long as I remained there, no one would ever change that decision. I went to great lengths to erase everything connected to my past. I became the master of the Intelligence Bureau and thought I could go on living like that forever. But 5 years had already passed, so why did marriage have to come up now of all times? Saying she liked me? It was absurd. Mother barely socialized as it was, and the only people she interacted with were top-ranking nobles. How could she possibly know that debt-ridden baroness? The Duchess had been startled by her earlier, and before anything could be properly discussed, she left. I had actually intended to help her pay off those private debts. After all, she had saved an entire alley of people. That debt had to be settled somehow. Going back directly now would be a little awkward, and at this hour, she should still be in class. No matter how I looked at it, nothing about this made sense. She was clearly one of the busiest people in the capital. She worked nonstop every day, yet no one had ever heard her complain. An ordinary person would probably have broken down long ago, but she always remained so upbeat. The most difficult problems seemed almost not to exist when they landed in her hands. How exactly did she do it? She certainly loved money, but she had her reasons. She was absolutely not the sort of person who would swindle others. It seemed I really would have to call her over and speak face-to-face, finish what was left unfinished, and talk about that utterly ridiculous marriage plan while I was at it. First period starts at 9. It really was a little too early to be out now. If I'd known, I should have eaten breakfast first. Good morning, Baroness Judith Allen. We have come from the ducal house. By the Duchess's order, we are here to escort you there. Her Grace also specifically instructed us to invite you with the courtesy reserved for an honored guest. Wait a moment. I still have several tutoring sessions today. I need to go send out cancellation notices first. There's no need for that trouble. The ducal house has already taken care of those matters for you. Truly worthy of the ducal house. Their efficiency was so fast, it left no room to refuse. In that case, I'll come with you now. To investigate my background thoroughly within a single day, and even clear out my schedule, the Myers family's power was indeed extraordinary. What was strange, though, was that a family with that level of influence had still failed to find their missing son all these years. Every member of the Myers family was born with blonde hair, making them stand out wherever they went. While hair dye could conceal that it was expensive, hardly something a person in long-term hiding could use. Could it be that he really was no longer alive? Or perhaps he had been terminally ill back then and chose to run away from home so his family wouldn't have to watch him suffer, hiding himself away alone to die. If that were the case, I could understand why he would abandon wealth, status, and a family that loved him deeply. Please get in, Baroness Allen. Thank you. Since it had already come this far, there was nothing to shrink back from. The moment had finally arrived. I truly couldn't wait until tomorrow, so I sent people to bring you here directly. And let me also tell you, your background investigation has already been completed in full, Baroness. Do you find that offensive? Not at all. After all, yesterday, I was the one who came uninvited and disturbed the ducal house. That's right. She had only come yesterday. Yet somehow, though only one day had passed, it felt unbearably long. I'm not a patient person. Let's get straight to the point. What exactly is this proposal of yours? The young duke's disappearance is about to reach 5 full years. According to imperial law, his death must then be formally reported. But I'm certain that the duke and you are trying every possible way to delay that deadline. So you're saying you have a way to help us postpone it? No, I'm not here to offer a method. I've already seen through the plan you originally intended to use. You were planning to announce that some woman was carrying the young duke's child, weren't you? As long as you claim the unborn child carries the family's aura, the bloodline can be confirmed. That would give you legitimate grounds to postpone the death declaration. After all, a dead man cannot possibly have descendants. You're not wrong. In this world, only the head of the family can identify Maya's blood. As long as my husband personally acknowledges that child, no one would dare question the bloodline's authenticity. But you should also know that such a clumsy performance could only be sustained for a few short months at most. Couldn't you at least tell that child that the doors of the Maya's family would always remain open to him? With all due respect, Duchess, the young duke will never return. No matter what methods you use, he will never appear here again. If you insist on carrying out that plan, then I want to become that contract daughter-in-law. What did you say? I will pretend to be pregnant with the young duke's child, and then a few months later, I myself will announce that the child was miscarried. That is the proposal I am offering you, Baroness Aylin. This isn't something I can casually agree to. You must understand that no matter how short this contract marriage lasts, the fact that you were once divorced will remain on record forever. Even the pregnancy and miscarriage will be remembered by everyone as real history. All of it will become an enormous stain on your reputation, something that can never be erased. Are you truly prepared to bear that cost? You must have already seen it in your investigation report, haven't you? The debts my father left behind are so great that even if I lived 100 lifetimes, I still couldn't repay them. I have no one to rely on now, and no way at all to fill that bottomless pit. Things like noble dignity and reputation are luxuries far beyond someone like me. The costs you're worried about mean nothing to me. Compared to those empty illusions, surviving until tomorrow is the only thing I care about right now. Who would have thought that after all that stubbornness, she could still remain so calm? This woman was far more unfathomable than I had imagined. So young, yet always capable of doing things no one expected. So what you mean is she never went traveling at all? And during all that time, there wasn't even any missing person record? That's right, Duchess. And this woman's movements over the past few years are almost suspiciously clean. The only unusual point is that she frequently visited the local intelligence bureau. But based on the investigation so far, she seems to have only been selling scraps of gossip she heard while working as a tutor. Did all her information about Ejin come from that place as well? Even if it did, how could an ordinary information broker possibly know? About that letter hidden deep by the wardrobe? That's impossible. This is the Myas estate. Where in the world did she see through all of this? She even knows that I was planning to delay the death report. There's no way that was just luck. Where exactly did she obtain all this information? I have a question. So your meaning is that she never went traveling at all? There wasn't even any missing person record during all that time. Since I was little, the things I dreamed about often became reality. This time, I just happened to dream about the young duke and you, that's all. Then where exactly is Ejin now? Other than what I've already told you, I know nothing. That vague answer only made the whole matter even more mysterious. Precognitive dreams? It sounded absurd, but it seemed I had no other choice now but to believe her for the time being. Thank you for your trust. Duchess, Baroness Aylin, do you not understand at all how to negotiate a business deal? If you truly wanted this transaction to succeed, then you should never have told me so directly that Ejin will never return. You should have lied and said he'd be back in a few months, or simply kept your mouth shut from beginning to end. Aren't you afraid that by placing this worst possible truth right on the table, I might fall into despair and destroy our cooperation completely? You were the one asking me for help. So why would you still say something like he'll never come back? For a woman who doesn't even care about preserving her pride, is this kind of painful honesty really necessary? In my experience, if someone exposes a weakness harmful to themselves before a deal is even concluded, then there must be some special reason behind it. Baroness, tell me your reason. What exactly are you planning? That's right. Judith the noblewoman may no longer really exist. but I have not abandoned my bottom line as a human being. You should already have investigated this thoroughly. It's true that I desperately need money right now, but I will never obtain it through deception and manipulation, especially not by exploiting someone else's longing for their family. Let me say this one last time. Doing this will only stain the ducal house. It won't bring the young duke back, and it will only waste a huge sum of money for nothing. If you can accept what I've just said, then please allow me to remain here as your contract daughter-in-law. I will fulfill my responsibilities properly and never bring any trouble to the ducal house. Since this had already been part of the plan from the start, perhaps entrusting it to the child before me was not such a bad choice after all. Very well. Since you insist, then we'll officially conclude this deal. And since time is tight, we may as well handle the marriage registration too. The Duke will be back tomorrow. Before we submit the application, let's confirm one last time that everything is in order. Baroness, you must always remember that this is only a transaction. You absolutely must not interfere in the internal affairs of the ducal house. Naturally, I understand my position very well. And one final point. If Aegon returns safely, you must divorce immediately. I hope that child will one day be able to marry the person he truly loves. Can you accept that condition? Please don't worry. I know exactly where I stand. When that day comes, I will leave the ducal house cleanly. As a deposit, I will first help you pay off all your debts. Once the contract ends smoothly, I will pay you the same amount again. What? Not only would she clear my debts, she'd give me the same amount again afterward? Judith was completely stunned, her mind filled with the sound of gold coins raining down. After all, this arrangement was delaying a young woman's future. If the compensation wasn't generous enough, that would be outrageous. Wait here a moment. I'll have someone prepare it right away. So should I go call for carriage now? No need for that. We'll give you a check stamped with the ducal seal directly. Heavens, was this really not a dream? Judith pinched her own face hard, afraid everything might still be an illusion. Seeing her like that, Isabella actually smiled. Now that is the sort of expression someone your age should have. Duchess, I truly don't know how to thank you enough. Looking at the child in front of her, so excited she was almost incoherent, Isabella didn't know how to react for a moment. Thank you so much. You're my great benefactor. I'll definitely do my utmost to handle what you've entrusted to me. Judith bowed deeply. Faced with this sudden enthusiasm, Isabella found herself momentarily speechless. She turned her head away a little stiffly, deliberately putting some distance between them. This amount of money is nothing to me, so don't get any strange ideas. The reason I'm giving you all this is absolutely not because I particularly like you, Miss Judith. Even if you say that, I'm still very grateful to you. Judith's radiant smile seemed to lighten the very air. Isabella fell silent. This kind of straightforward gratitude was clearly beyond what she knew how to handle. Congratulations, Baroness Aelin. All your debts have been settled. Really? I really paid off all of that money. Looking at the receipt in front of her, Judith felt so unreal it was as if she were floating. We may be moneylenders, but we don't collect money that has already been repaid. Of course, if you ever need to borrow again, we'll meet again. Are you joking? I'll never borrow money again in this lifetime. The merchant looked at Judith's retreating figure and couldn't help but sigh in admiration. That gambler Paul actually had such a reliable daughter. Not only did she not run away, she even paid back the principal in full. That's a miracle. Did you get rich from some kind of business venture? If you have a good opportunity, I'd gladly invest. He leaned closer to Judith, his voice full of curiosity and probing. No matter how much you hate your parents, in some ways, you'll always resemble them. What nonsense are you talking about? Judith walked out without even turning her head. All she wanted was to completely shake off that heavy shadow from her past. In truth, he wasn't wrong. I'm gambling too. It's just that the wager I've staked is my entire life. Without looking back, Judith waved her hand, saying farewell to that dark and damp past. When she pushed the door open and stood beneath the brilliant sunlight, the suffocating weight that had pressed on her chest for years finally disappeared completely. In that moment, her body felt lighter than ever before. I'm finally free. Those debts I once thought I could never repay in this lifetime, those shadows that shackled me like chains, from now on, they could no longer stop me. I had thought that crushing debt would bind me forever. I never imagined I'd regain my freedom so quickly. I owe it all to the Duchess's generosity. Looking at the bills fluttering through the air, Judith knew perfectly well that the compensation she'd been given was extraordinarily generous. Since I've taken so much money, then I'll just have to perform even better. If there was something I could do for the ducal house right now, then my first priority was to deal with that problem. In Judith's mind appeared Carl's melancholy face, but the information I currently held was still too limited. It seemed that before taking any real action, I had to make another trip to the Intelligence Guild. I nearly forgot. He did tell me to come by today. The timing actually works out perfectly. As she walked, Judith thought to herself that since they were meeting anyway, she might as well ask him for a favor. When she pushed open the study door, Egan was sitting on the sofa, a faint trace of scrutiny in his tone. You went to the Duke's residence first thing in the morning. Don't tell me you stayed there all this time. Judith sat down gracefully, sounding as casual as if she were discussing the weather. Yes, and I also took care of the marriage registration. What? You said the registration? Egan froze completely. Well, this news is going to spread through the whole city sooner or later, so I might as well tell you first. Judith leaned close to his ear and lowered her voice. The ducal house is about to announce that I'm carrying the young duke's child. What? How is that possible? Egan fell into total confusion. He kept muttering to himself, registered, pregnant. How did this happen? This makes no sense at all. Judith watched him standing there in a daze and couldn't help complaining inwardly. This was the first time she had ever seen him so thoroughly shaken, especially when she had already dropped hints before. Seeing Egan still mumbling to himself, Judith suddenly felt mischievous. She deliberately leaned in a little closer and stared at him with a smile. Don't tell me. You've fallen for me. Egan jolted and couldn't force out a single word for a long time. Could it be that behind that mask, you've secretly been in love with me? Judith's words landed with knife-like precision. For a moment, he even suspected she had used the authority of the Grey Intelligence leader to spy on him in secret. Egan flustered so badly he nearly jumped in place, loudly denying that there was absolutely no such thing. But Judith had no intention of letting him off. If you're not interested in me, then why were you so shocked when you heard I was getting married? Egan forced himself to explain. Anyone who heard you were marrying Egan would think it was absurd, all right? Not to mention this ridiculous lie about being pregnant. Judith's lips curled slightly after hearing that, and she countered at once. You're not the young Duke himself, so how would you know I'm lying? Egan was completely cornered. In his panic, he blurted out, That's because I am... Before he could finish, he stopped dead. He had almost let that earth-shaking secret slip out. Egan finally calmed down and began using logic to counter Judith. You've only been an adult for less than a week, right? And at a time like this, you're saying you're pregnant? Isn't that a little too outrageous? Judith slapped her thigh as if she had only just realized it. Oh, you're right. Young people these days really are bold. But I've always worked hard to survive. Thanks for the reminder. Egan looked speechless. So it really is a lie. Judith blinked playfully and quietly told him to keep it secret. At least you weren't fooled by some imposter. After all, who would dare impersonate young Duke Egan Myas? Then she changed the subject. By the way, why did you ask to meet today? After the joking ended, Egan's expression suddenly turned deeply solemn. Judith, thank you. Because of you, my subordinates and I were able to survive on that street. Judith was generous enough to split the credit in half. It's also because you trusted me that things turn out this way. But since you're so grateful, I'll leave the troublesome things from here on out, like the investigations and retaliation, to you. Egan looked at her, his tone firm and impossible to refuse. Even so, I still have to repay this life-saving favor with my own hands. Judith sipped her tea leisurely while calculating in her head just how much he planned to spend to buy back his life. If it wasn't enough money, information would do too. Just then, Egan suddenly spoke, confidence filling his voice. I'll help you pay off all your debts. He even added, thoughtfully, you don't need to feel burdened at all. A little money like that can't possibly compare to a life debt. Judith slowly set down her teacup and gave a helpless sigh. Well, I already paid it all back. Egan froze on the spot and even wondered if he had heard wrong. Already paid it back? Judith dropped another bomb. Not only did I clear the debt, I did it with the ducal family's money. Egan reacted fast and instantly worked through the insane logic behind it. First, you register the marriage, then announce the pregnancy, and then took a huge compensation payment from the ducal house. All of this was to delay Egan's official declaration of death, wasn't it? Judith couldn't help laughing. As expected of an intelligence man, you really are quick. No wonder your new guild has such strong cash flow. But Egan couldn't laugh at all. He seriously warned Judith that a lie like this wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, you'll have to face the day you can't produce a child. What are you planning to do then? Judith tilted her head, sounding as calm as if she were discussing tomorrow's weather. By then, I'll be a divorced woman. And on top of that, a pitiful woman who suffered a miscarriage. Don't worry. Before making this decision, I calculated every step very clearly. Judith couldn't resist teasing him. If I'd known earlier that you were a hidden big sponsor, I might have chosen a different plan. But there's no turning back now. If you keep this secret, that'll be repayment enough. Egan nodded solemnly. If it's something you ask for, I'll do everything in my power. Judith didn't hold back and immediately made her first request. I need information about the Myas ducal house. This time, it was Egan's turn to struggle. He actually had no informants inside the ducal residence at all. He tentatively suggested, since you're going to move in soon anyway, wouldn't it be better to investigate it yourself then? Judith shook her head. I'm only a contract wife. In essence, I'm still an outsider. If I move too boldly, it'll ruin everything. Egan heard the danger in her words and simply proposed an even crazier idea. Then break the contract outright. If they want a penalty, I'll pay with my life. But Judith was clear-headed. The ducal house would never let an outsider who knows their secrets walk free. And besides, this is something I have to do myself. Egan stared into her eyes, his tone turning unusually serious. Other than money, is there some other reason you absolutely have to jump into that fire pit? Faced with this question, Judith finally confessed. That's right. Money isn't the only reason. Once I've learned certain things, I have no way of pretending I didn't see them. If things continue the way they are now, that young heir, Carl, will soon be in mortal danger. Now that she had become the fake daughter-in-law of the Myas family, Judith knew very well that she had to accomplish one task: protect the second son of the house, Carl Myas. He had originally been just an innocent child. But after one disaster after another struck the family, and the Duke and Duchess could no longer care for him, Carl's whole world collapsed. And just when he was at his most helpless, someone began harboring wicked intentions and took aim at him. The real nightmare had only just begun. Who would have thought that the one playing the role of the fake daughter-in-law in the original story would actually be the household maid, Sarah? On the surface, she was taking care of Carl, but behind the scenes, she was full of schemes. While the Duke and Duchess remained unaware, Sarah used Carl's youth and ignorance to torment him in every possible way. By now, that probably still hadn't stopped. This was bad. Judith realized she had no allies at all, while Sarah was deeply entrenched here. If Judith exposed even the slightest weakness, Carl would probably be eliminated by Sarah before she could save him. Judith understood very clearly that she absolutely could not alert the enemy right now. If word reached Sarah's ears, all of her previous efforts would be wasted. She had intended to stop there, but Egan, sitting across from her, could no longer sit still. He stared at Judith and asked whether this was really true. Since things had come this far, Judith decided to lay it out plainly. She said this information wasn't for sale. What she wanted was an ally who would sincerely help. Unexpectedly, Egan answered without hesitation. He said he would definitely help. At that moment, the whole situation changed. Judith had finally gotten the strongest helper she could ask for. Her tactic of pretending to withdraw had worked perfectly. She deliberately sighed and said that since he knew nothing about the ducal house, it looked like this partnership couldn't happen after all. The moment Egan heard that, he panicked and came clean at once, loudly insisting that he actually knew quite a lot. Then why did you lie to me earlier? Judith pressed while the iron was hot, putting on an aggrieved expression. She said she had even told him something as private as her pregnancy, and this was what she got in return: deception. Egan was completely caught in her grip now. Not only did he have to help, he would probably also feel that he owed Judith an enormous debt of gratitude. Egan still tried to use professional ethics as a shield, saying that even with a client, there were some secrets he absolutely couldn't reveal. Judith wasn't buying that. She immediately switched to pure moral pressure, saying that apparently even a life-saving benefactor's face meant nothing. She even exposed his lie on the spot. Egan completely lost his footing. While trying to explain that he really had no current employer involved, Judith caught the logical hole in his words. If there isn't one, then where did that excuse you just gave come from? Egan could only shake his head with a bitter smile, admitting that he had never been this flustered in his entire life. But Judith had no intention of letting him go so easily. While sipping tea, she kept pressing him, saying that now that his lie had been exposed, he ought to compensate her with something actually useful. Under Judith's relentless pressure, Egan sat across from her in silence for a long time. He slowly set down his teacup, as if finally making some kind of decision. He lowered his voice and said, "I know a secret passage leading into the ducal residence." Who would have guessed that Egan had something this powerful in his hands? Many years ago, he had obtained a secret map of the ducal estate. The passages on it led to almost every room. Judith understood immediately. This was the key to breaking the deadlock. If they could sneak into Carl's room, they could find out exactly what he and that Sarah were up to. She hurriedly asked how long it would take to copy the map, practically dying to get this information into her hands right away. But unexpectedly, Egan's expression changed at that moment. He coldly replied, "I can't just hand that over to you for free." Judith froze on the spot. Egan said bluntly that the ducal residence was practically a labyrinth. Even with the map in hand, there was no guarantee she wouldn't get lost or be caught red-handed by the guards. This put Judith in a difficult position. If even the map wasn't reliable, then how was this mission supposed to continue? Unexpectedly, Egan abruptly changed tone and actually offered to lead the way in person. With the guild leader himself stepping in, Judith instantly felt reassured. She quickly asked what the next step was. Egan adjusted his mask and calmly laid out the first move. "First, we stake out the scene and observe." Egan really was a man of action. The moment the plan was decided, he stood up and was ready to leave immediately. His "let's go right now" attitude left Judith momentarily speechless. Faced with her hesitation, Egan actually had the upper hand. If the child's life is truly in danger, then not even a single second can be wasted. Judith came to her senses and quickly followed after him. She couldn't help muttering inwardly. She had assumed he was a cold-blooded businessman, but the moment he heard a child was in danger, he seemed more anxious than anyone else. Could it be that this masked man also had a hidden soft spot? With a creak from the floorboards, who would have thought that beneath this dilapidated little wooden shack, there really was something else entirely? Judith looked at the secret passage before her and could hardly believe her eyes. A top-secret route leading straight into the ducal residence was hidden in such an inconspicuous place. The two of them descended the steps together, and the more Judith thought about it, the stranger it felt. How exactly had Egan managed to get intelligence that even the Duke himself might not know? When Judith questioned him, Egan only answered lightly that he had discovered it by accident. He specifically warned Judith that the Duke and Duchess must never learn about this. As they walked, Judith complained that the security at such a grand ducal residence was so full of holes that outsiders could apparently come and go at will. Egan hurriedly defended himself, swearing that he alone knew of this secret tunnel. But Judith didn't believe him at all. If it's such a secret, then someone must have leaked it in the first place, right? Under Judith's steady pressure, Egan calmly dropped a bombshell. The person who had told him the secret was already dead. Judith was still stunned by the fact that there was now no one left to verify the story when Egan pointed ahead to the real tunnel. From here on, looking at the deep, bottomless-looking passage before her, Judith finally understood why Egan had said the map was useless. This place was practically a maze, and it gave off an eerie feeling everywhere. Just as Judith was beginning to feel uneasy, Egan suddenly said, "Excuse me." Before she could react, a cold, gloved hand tightly took hold of hers. In a serious tone, Egan warned her that she absolutely had to stay right by his side. Otherwise, If she got separated in a place like this, she would never make it out again. Judith obediently nodded. She let him lead her forward. Then he turned his head and asked Judith whether she really didn't mind leaving a marriage record in the official files. Once a marriage record was entered into the registry, it would become nearly impossible for her to marry a respectable noble in the future. But Judith appeared completely unconcerned. She even mocked herself, saying she had never learned anything about noble honor. Empty titles like that meant nothing to her. Her father had never taught her what responsibility was, and her mother had all but abandoned her as a daughter. Though they were both nobles in name, their marriage had long since rotted through. Having grown up in such a cold environment, Judith had already seen through so-called noble marriages. To her, they were nothing more than transactions doomed to fail. In Judith's memories, her father was someone who was almost never home, while her mother was actually closer to a servant in the house than to her husband. In the end, her mother even abandoned everything and eloped with that man. Watching her mother run off with someone else, young Judith hadn't felt much hatred. She had only wondered whether things might have turned out completely differently if her mother had had the courage from the beginning to marry the person she truly loved. After all, the smile on her mother's face beside that man was brighter than anything Judith had ever seen before. Judith said calmly that she truly didn't care whether her future husband was a noble or not. Even if he were just a hard-working commoner, she could accept that. Ijin clearly hadn't expected such an answer and couldn't help asking, "You really could accept a commoner?" Judith replied with a bitter smile that as long as she didn't have to marry a noble like her father, even living as an ordinary person would be 100 times better than her current life. She even wished she could sever ties with her father immediately, so she wouldn't have to keep carrying all the endless mess he had left behind. At that, Judith suddenly seemed to remember something. She said there was actually one most important condition for her future husband. Ijin unconsciously tightened his grip on her hand and quietly asked what that condition was. With a serious face, Judith declared that her one absolute requirement for a future husband was that he had to be handsome. Ijin almost laughed in disbelief. He couldn't help mocking her, saying that when it came to judging by looks, she really was consistent from beginning to end. Judith was perfectly justified in return. Everyone has at least one thing they won't compromise on. Just then, a faint light finally appeared at the end of the tunnel. Ijin lowered his voice and reminded her, "The exit is inside the wardrobe in Carl's bedroom. Once we're out, don't make a sound." The two of them carefully pushed open the hidden door and slipped into the cramped wardrobe. Clothes were stacked everywhere in layers, and the space was so narrow they could barely move. They were forced to squeeze together and hold their breath while listening for any sound outside. Even the slightest noise would ruin the infiltration completely. Ijin lowered his voice and reminded her, "If you look through this crack in the door, you can see the room clearly." Judith followed his indication, and the view really was perfect. But as she kept looking, her attention drifted completely off course. At this distance, she finally realized that Ijin's physique was distractingly good. In the past, all she had ever thought about was paying off debt. She studied desperately from morning to night and constantly made repayment plans. She had never had any mental room to think about anything else. On top of that, Ijin always wore a mask, and he even used magic to alter his appearance. He had hidden himself too deeply, so deeply that she couldn't even clearly remember what his original voice sounded like. And when they first met, she hadn't even reached adulthood yet. In her eyes, he had only been a master of intelligence. She had never regarded him as a man. So she truly had never imagined that contact this slight could throw her so badly off balance. This unfamiliar feeling she had never experienced before was spreading through her whole body from her fingertips. Ijin was far too dangerous right now. The distance between them was far too close. Judith could even feel his solid frame pressing firmly against her. The sound of his breathing beneath the mask seemed to rise and fall right beside her ear. Egan suddenly leaned closer and asked, "Can you see clearly from there?" Judith could only answer awkwardly that she could see very clearly, and even suggested he step out and rest first, since the space here was so cramped. But Egan saw right through her in an instant and asked whether she was trying to drive him away, because she was uncomfortable. Judith could no longer hide it, and simply admitted that he had figured her out. As she tried to put some distance between them, she explained that since she was smaller, there should still be room even in a cramped space. But all that fidgeting only made the atmosphere even more chaotic. Egan directly pinned her in place and told her to stop squirming around. There was a trace of helplessness in his voice when he said that she wasn't the only one feeling uncomfortable right now, in such a narrow space. Judith couldn't help complaining that with Egan's build, he could barely move at all inside the wardrobe. Egan immediately shot back and told her to stop moving at once. After all, the way they were positioned now, it was practically no different from embracing each other directly. If she kept brushing against him like this, things would really get out of control. Judith still wanted him to shift aside, but Egan suddenly turned serious and told her that Judith was completely unsuited to being his partner. Faced with her confusion, Egan finally spoke honestly. As long as he was with her, he would completely lose his composure and even become childish like a boy. Judith burst out laughing after hearing that and teased him for actually having self-awareness. She even retorted righteously that she had only just become an adult, so being a little immature was only natural. Since everything had now been said out loud, the two of them decided on a temporary truce. After all, they were hiding here today in order to observe the young master, Carl. Watching Carl quietly read with a teddy bear in his arms, Judith couldn't help sighing at how adorable he was. With such bright, healing looks, he practically fit the male lead template perfectly. Who could have imagined that in the future, he would become that twisted villain who even went so far as to cruelly bully the heroine? Just then, a voice came from outside the door, the maid Sarah asking for permission to enter. Carl obediently told her to come in, his tone filled with trust. Hiding in the dark, Judith had finally been waiting for this woman. She fixed her gaze on Sarah's every move, because Judith knew very well that the root cause that had slowly pushed Carl from a sunny-hearted boy into the abyss was this seemingly gentle maid. From a young age, Sarah had known she was beautiful and clever. That innate sense of superiority made her believe from the bottom of her heart that she was different from the other maids. She felt that this kind of servant's work was beneath someone like her. The place she truly ought to be was by Egan's side. In order to achieve that goal, she had hidden herself in the shadows and observed for a very long time. Although Egan would occasionally give her books or quills, Sarah understood more clearly than anyone that these tiny favors had absolutely nothing to do with affection between a man and a woman. So she never dared cross the line and even deliberately kept her distance. Because she had an instinct. The moment she showed too much greed or too much attachment, the Duke would cast her aside without hesitation, like throwing away trash. That extreme clarity and restraint were what made this woman truly terrifying. After Carl was born, Egan doted on this younger brother from the bottom of his heart. Sarah observed all of it with sharp eyes. She began taking even greater care of Carl, because in her view, as long as she could firmly grasp Carl, she could naturally move one step closer to Egan. Carl had been a genius from childhood, and Sarah could always easily answer the difficult questions that even teachers struggled with. As a result, Carl developed a deep dependence on her. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The time the three of them spent together grew more and more frequent. Sarah had even begun fantasizing about the day she would throw off her lowly status and become the Duchess. But just when she felt her dream was about to come true, Egan suddenly vanished. To Sarah, the news was utterly devastating. All of her ambition and expectations turned to nothing in an instant. Looking at Carl in front of her, a child who only cried for his brother, the last trace of patience in Sarah's heart disappeared completely. Since Egan was no longer here, then this former bargaining chip now had only one use left. Since she could not become the Duchess, Sarah decided to personally destroy the place where her dream had shattered. And the best tool in her hands was Carl, who trusted her 100%. She intended to use the cruelest possible method, exploiting that pure bond to drag the entire duchy into hell. What was laughable was that in the eyes of outsiders, Sarah appeared to be perfection itself. Aegon had even been comforting Judith, saying that the maid was upright and trustworthy, had been by Carl's side since childhood, and was someone even the missing Aegon had deeply trusted. Hearing all these so-called praises, Judith couldn't help laughing out loud. She had finally confirmed one thing. Everyone in this household had been fooled by Sarah's acting. Sarah was gently stroking Carl's short golden hair, but the words coming from her mouth were utterly vicious. She deliberately lowered her voice to frighten him. If her grace finds out you're doing this, she'll be very angry. Psychological torture was Sarah's greatest weapon. Sarah looked at Carl before her tone brimming with malice. She said, "You look awfully relaxed right now, sitting here reading with a doll in your arms. Aren't you afraid people might misunderstand?" She deliberately leaned closer to Carl and said that if her grace saw this, she would surely think he was happy because his brother Aegon had disappeared and now he could naturally take the position of heir. That accusation, so cruel it cut to the bone, made Carl collapse completely. He loudly protested that it was nonsense. He prayed every single day, hoping his brother would come back soon. Carl desperately explained that he absolutely had never harbored such a vile thought. But Sarah followed his words by laying a deadlier trap. She said that of course she believed him, but what would her grace think? And even the missing Aegon might misunderstand as well. Sarah deliberately leaned in close to Carl, her voice gentle but cold. "If your brother knows you're doing just fine on your own, perhaps he'll never come back to this house again." That vicious psychological suggestion sent Carl into complete collapse. He screamed in resistance, saying it wasn't like that at all. The reason he was studying so hard was because his brother had once told him to finish all these books before he turned 10. He only wanted his brother to return and praise him in person, just once. Then Sarah lowered her voice on purpose and said that if he wanted his brother to return sooner, he would need to use a different method. She began asking about Carl's weight and even asked reproachfully, "Haven't you been eating too well lately?" Carl looked confused. He said his mother had always kept an eye on him, and if he left too much food uneaten, she would definitely be heartbroken. But Sarah only gave a cold laugh. She said that if her grace saw how quickly he was growing now, how sad would his missing brother be? His brother would surely think that even without him by his side, his little brother still ate well and grew well and didn't miss him at all. That twisted logic plunged Carl into terrible pain. He didn't want to upset his mother, but he was even more afraid of being misunderstood by his brother. Sarah tightly held Carl's hand and proposed a truly vicious plan. After meals, she told him to go to the back room, and she would help him make himself throw up. She said, "Only when you become thin and sickly, and word reaches your brother's ears, will he understand your feelings." Carl had no idea he was stepping toward the abyss. He even thought Sarah was incredibly clever. This way, he could both hide it from his mother and prove his innocence to his brother. He naively threw his arms around Sarah and said she was the person in this world who treated him best. Only she would tell him these heartfelt truths. Carl even swore to himself that no matter what Sarah said in the future, he would believe her unconditionally. Judith could hardly believe that maid could be so vicious as to do something like this to a child. She was relieved they had uncovered the truth, but the thought of leaving Carl behind made her heart feel tightly clenched. At her side, Aegon had clearly reached the limit of what he could endure. His whole body radiated fury, and he looked as though he wanted nothing more than to rush out and personally deal with that woman. In a low voice, he asked Judith whether she could return alone. He wanted Sarah to pay, right now, a painful price for what she had done. Seeing this, Judith hurriedly stopped him, gripping his hand tightly and telling him he absolutely had to stay calm. If he rushed out now, not only would he fail to save anyone, but everything they had done so far would be wasted. After all, in Carl's heart, Sarah was still the one worthy of trust. "I'll think of a way to handle it." That was precisely why Judith had come here. But just then, Sarah in the distance suddenly stopped moving. She had sharply detected that something was off, as if there had been a sound that didn't belong here. Suspiciously, she turned to Carl and asked whether he had brought someone else inside. Carl, completely confused by the question, instinctively shook his head. Sarah was clearly not convinced. Full of suspicion, she began searching the room. Her heavy footsteps drew closer and closer. Hiding in the darkness, Judith froze completely in place. She stared at that approaching figure, not daring to breathe too loudly. In the end, Sarah stopped in front of the wardrobe. She was certain that the sound she had heard had come from there. Without a moment's hesitation, she reached out and yanked the door open. She started rummaging wildly through the wardrobe. Had she really heard something just now? Carl jumped in alarm at the noise and couldn't help asking Sarah what was wrong. In an instant, she put on a smile and casually told him that nothing had happened. Sarah passed the noise off as water leaking somewhere and finally turned away. Only then did Egan let out a breath of relief, grateful they had not been caught on the spot. But he did not release Judith immediately. Instead, he held her even tighter and suggested they stay like this for a little longer. Judith's entire body stiffened. She could only stammer in response. Although they had escaped disaster thanks to him, this overly intimate distance was really becoming hard to endure. Egan took the initiative to apologize, admitting that he had indeed lost control a little just now. That maid called Sarah had acted so skillfully that she had deceived everyone. Then he asked Judith what she intended to do next. After all, he had risked sneaking in here because he couldn't stop worrying about Carl, could he? Judith had clearly not expected this cold, aloof man to see through her thoughts at a glance. She couldn't help laughing outright and teasing that her master was unusually talkative today. So he had a gentle side too. Egan looked a little uncomfortable at that and could only keep a straight face and tell her to shut up. Then he suddenly frowned and complained that when she had laughed just now, her breath had all brushed against his neck. Judith thought he was hopelessly unromantic. She pointed out that she had only laughed a little, and she had even made sure her breath was fresh. But Egan's tone instantly turned colder. He called Judith by name and flatly concluded that she was not pregnant at all. More than that, he even mocked her to her face, saying she knew absolutely nothing about men. Judith was completely stunned. She instinctively asked how he had figured it out. Her seemingly perfect disguise had shattered to pieces in front of this man in an instant. Egan finally put some distance between them and calmly asked Judith what exactly her next plan was. Judith, however, remained composed and said outright that today's objective had already been achieved, because the people who could save Carl had never been the two of them in the first place. Egan clearly didn't quite understand. If it wasn't the two of them, then who else could pull the child out of the fire pit? Judith gave a reason that was impossible to refute. She said that when a child was in danger, the only people who could truly save him were his own parents. The next morning, a letter from Duchess Isabella Myas broke the quiet calm. In the letter, Isabella wrote that the Duke would be arriving that afternoon, and so she wished to invite Judith to lunch. It was not merely a simple tea gathering. The Duchess also intended to take this opportunity to formally introduce her to young Carl. After all, in name, they would soon become family. After reading the letter, Judith immediately decided to write a reply and had the attendant wait outside the door for a moment. Though it was only a luncheon invitation, she knew perfectly well that the real test was only beginning now. Before Judith could say anything, Egan had already guessed the contents of the new letter. Since the Duke was returning today, then the Duchess would certainly arrange a formal meeting. Judith was startled by his sharpness. Seeing that lunchtime was approaching, she urged Egan to leave quickly and stop lingering in her room first thing in the morning. Egan, however, seemed rather interested. He said bluntly that although he was busy, he wanted even more to see how she intended to wrap this up. As Judith bent over her reply, Egan suddenly lowered his voice. He said that he also had a younger brother around Carl's age. So when he saw that child suffering, he simply could not remain entirely uninvolved. Those words made Judith stop writing. She had always thought this man was a cold-blooded loner with no blood, no tears, and no family ties at all. After hearing that, Egan looked helpless. He felt that kind of assessment was even harsher than cursing him outright. Judith casually asked whether the back garden also had a hidden passage. Egan set down his teacup and said that there was no such shortcut outdoors, but he was fully capable of slipping in silently without alerting anyone. Before Judith could react, Egan threw out an extremely dangerous idea. He said he had thought about it last night, and the simplest solution would be to sneak directly into the back garden and personally eliminate that troublesome maid. Egan added that he would do it alone and absolutely would not let Judith interfere. Once the two of them acted together, the risk of exposure would double. At that point, neither of them would get away clean. Egan set down his teacup, and his voice carried a murderous certainty that allowed no doubt. He felt that if that maid was not removed, Carl would lose his life sooner or later. In the logic of someone like him, an evil person who dared lay hands on a child had no need to remain alive. But Judith abruptly cut him off, saying that such an extreme method would solve nothing. She knew very well how Egan operated. But right now, what Carl needed most was not a dead maid, but to see through Sarah's false and hypocritical true face. If Sarah were to die mysteriously before the truth came to light, Carl would not find release. On the contrary, he would remember only her goodness forever. The dead cannot speak in their own defense. That would turn Sarah into a perfect victim in the child's heart. At that point, Carl would not only fail to wake up to the truth, he might spend the rest of his life suffering under Sarah's lies. These words plunged Egan into silence. Looking at the false smile reflected in the teacup, he seemed finally to realize that some things could not be cut apart by sword or blade. Judith still wasn't finished. She said that once a person died, the words they left behind in life often had an even deeper influence. That kind of remembrance, like a curse, would completely lock Carl's life in place. Egan was silent for a long time after hearing this. At last he admitted that Judith was right and even felt some regret for having lost control earlier. He said bluntly that he had been too impulsive and had shown Judith the ugliest side of himself. But Judith did not mind at all. Instead, she comforted him softly. Getting angry when faced with something so infuriating was the normal reaction. Looking at the man before her, this man who worried and stumbled and lost composure, Judith felt something stir faintly in her heart. Though they had known each other for years, there had always been a distance between them, invisible and impossible to touch. But now, suddenly, she felt that this lofty man seemed much easier to get along with, more like an ordinary person of flesh and blood. Judith couldn't help recalling that moment in the secret passage when they had been pressed so close together. That near contact had indeed changed something subtle between them. While she was still lost in thought, Egan suddenly called her name. His tone was more solemn than usual. Then and there, he made her a promise. No matter what Judith's next plan was, he would unconditionally follow her will. That sudden declaration of absolute loyalty left Judith at a loss for a moment. She could only stand there blankly and agree first. But Egan clearly meant more than that. He immediately emphasized that Judith had to truly understand the deeper meaning behind what he was saying. Looking at the man's earnest expression, Judith only became more confused. Egan finally laid his cards on the table. He said that in the past, he had trusted no one, so he had grown used to acting alone. But this time, he had decided to step back and let Judith take the lead completely. No matter what she wanted to do, he would support her with everything he had from behind the scenes. Judith couldn't help wanting to laugh and asked if, had he not stepped back, he had planned to jump out and forcibly interfere with her plan at any moment. But Egan's next words changed the atmosphere instantly. He stared straight at Judith and admitted that this was trust and not merely a rational judgment. He was entrusting even his feelings to Judith. Though she complained that they had already worked together for 3 years, and talking about trust only now seemed a bit late, Egan did not retreat. He merely persisted calmly. This was the truest thing in his heart at this very moment. Since Egan had already spoken to this extent, Judith also decided it was time to show some real ability and prove she was worthy of that trust. Looking at the letter in her hand, her tone carried absolute confidence, because by this very afternoon, all of the trouble would be brought to a complete end. At the same time, over at the ducal residence, they received Judith's reply. She politely declined the lunch invitation, citing a prior engagement, and said she would only be able to attend punctually at tea time. Although the letter also courteously mentioned that the roses in the garden were in splendid bloom, and that she was very much looking forward to the upcoming gathering, that elusive, distant attitude made Duchess Isabella Myas unable to sit still. She couldn't help overthinking it, worrying that Judith had intentionally declined lunch simply to avoid her. In truth, having Judith remain here might not be a bad thing at all. She really had grown much thinner. She must have suffered a great deal living alone all this time. At this moment, Isabella's only thought was to let this child, who had suffered so much grievance, sit down and eat one good, steady meal. But the more she observed, the more satisfied Isabella became with Judith. This girl was not only exceptionally clever, but also upright and reliable in the way she handled things. She was simply the ideal daughter-in-law candidate tailored for their family. In Isabella's eyes, Judith already possessed all the qualities needed to become the mistress of the house. With just a little guidance and tempering, she would absolutely be able to uphold the family's dignity. Isabella was just thinking that everything could only be carried out after that person returned. But Carl keenly noticed that something about his mother's expression was off and couldn't help asking. Isabella immediately set aside her thoughts and casually found an excuse, saying she was only worried that he hadn't been eating properly. So as not to make his mother suspicious, Carl behaved especially obediently. He even deliberately took big bites in front of her, emphasizing that he had a good appetite today. But this overly deliberate attempt to please her could not hide how abnormal he was. Isabella smoothly steered the conversation to the real issue and asked why he had dismissed all his tutors and even skipped the night's training for so long. Under such persistent questioning, Carl could only defend himself softly, saying he was just too tired and simply wanted to rest for a while. Though the excuse was full of holes, Isabella did not expose him. She only followed his words with a sigh, saying that everyone really did have moments when they wanted to stop everything completely. If Carl had only been an ordinary child, perhaps he would not have remained so fixated on his brother's departure. After all, he had been only 3 years old at the time, yet he remembered everything that had happened. That extraordinary talent had instead become the root of his suffering. Fortunately, Sarah was still by his side now, and at the very least, she could fill a little of the emptiness Egan had left in this household. Putting away her melancholy, Isabella told Carl to finish his dessert before going upstairs, because she now had to leave to greet an important guest. When Carl asked curiously who it was, Isabella did not answer directly. She only smiled mysteriously and said she would introduce them later. Meanwhile, in the garden, the roses were in full bloom, and their rich fragrance filled the air. Since Judith liked it there, Isabella thought the garden would be the perfect place for the tea gathering. She was even beginning to carefully consider what sort of refreshments should be prepared to perfectly match the fragrance filling the grounds. But the peaceful tea gathering atmosphere was suddenly shattered in an instant by Judith's urgent cries. Before Isabella could even react, Judith had already rushed up in front of her. There was an unprecedented urgency in her voice. She had no time for etiquette at all. Young Master Carl is in danger right now. The situation is already extremely critical. We have to go to the scene immediately. In the sunlit garden, Carl was looking around uncertainly until he spotted that familiar figure. Sarah greeted him with a smile. "Welcome back, young master." Carl immediately ran over excitedly. "Did you enjoy lunch?" Sarah asked, but Carl looked a little regretful. Although he had eaten his fill, he hadn't been able to stay with his mother until the end, because there was a guest coming to the house that afternoon. Sarah instantly caught the key point. So the information from that morning had been correct. Since everyone would soon be going to the garden, then now was the best opportunity. Carl noticed nothing unusual at all and proudly shared that, following Sarah's advice, he had already canceled all his lessons and training. Now this quiet corner had only the two of them left. Sitting on the bench, Carl spoke with self-mockery in his voice, saying that all that education for heirs was meaningless. He even thanked Sarah for reminding him. "If it's for you, young master, of course I should do these things," Sarah said outwardly. But inside, she was full of ridicule. Just look at this child, the so-called genius of the ducal house. Wasn't he obeying her every word now? If only Egan were still here, everything would have been perfect. Only she deserved to be his wife. Why did you abandon me in the first place? You clearly knew that someone as smart and beautiful as I am would never be content being just a maid. If your parents couldn't give you to me, then you should have personally handed me that wealth and glory. This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Hatred churned in Sarah's heart. Yet when facing the young Carl, she put on a gentle face. Young master, this is the medicine I mentioned before. The one that can help you throw up your food. To get it for you, I made a special trip into the city last night. It took a great deal of effort to buy. Looking at the purple bottle Sarah handed him, Carl felt not the slightest suspicion. Instead, he thanked her happily. He had no idea what this so-called emetic potion would truly take away from him. Carl clutched the little bottle tightly, a trace of hope in his voice. If I never grow up, or if I become seriously ill, will my brother come back? Sarah followed his words downward. Not immediately, perhaps, but Ejin loves you so much that if he knew you were sick, he would certainly worry. While soothing him gently, she cast out the deadliest temptation of all, because only then would he have a reason to come back to your side. But if you stay healthy and smoothly inherit the title, then he may never step into this house again for the rest of his life. That single sentence shattered Carl's last hesitation. He lowered his head blankly. You're right. If I do too well, I'll never see my brother again. I absolutely can't be doing too well. Carl repeated those words as if they were his only way out. At his side, Sarah softly agreed. That's right, young master. I also miss the time when the three of us were together. Only if you become worse can those days be brought back. You are our only hope. What neither of them knew was that from the shadows behind the bushes, a pair of icy eyes was watching everything. Ejin was staring fixedly at that maid, the force in his hands nearly slipping out of control. Judith, hurry. If it weren't for the fact that I trust you, I would already have gone out there and killed that vicious, snake-hearted woman with my own hands. Drink it quickly now, young master. From now on, I'll bring the medicine to you punctually after every meal. Sarah urged him impatiently, her tone brimming with false concern. Carl slowly raised the bottle. In his heart, he was still silently comforting himself. As long as he drank it, he wouldn't make his father and mother worry. But just as the bottle was about to touch his lips, a shrill scream ripped through the air. Stop! You absolutely must not drink that. Before Carl could react, a hand struck the bottle away. With a sharp crack, the bottle of purple liquid shattered across the grass. Sarah, who had been so certain of success moments before, froze completely in place. Looking at the woman who had suddenly appeared before her, she couldn't speak for a long while. Why, your grace? Shut your mouth. The crisp sound of slap rang through the garden. That strike from Isabella completely shattered Sarah's disguise. Ungrateful wretch. Who gave you the nerve to lay your hands on my son? Like an iceberg, Isabella stood firmly in front of Carl, shielding him. The pressure radiating from her seemed to freeze even the air around them. She would not even spare Sarah another glance before giving a cold order. Drag her away at once. Call the knights. Throw this thing into the dungeon. The head maid did not dare delay in the slightest. She rushed forward with others and pinned down the still struggling Sarah. Let go of me. Let me go. Sarah shrieked like a madwoman. Even now, she was still spewing shameless nonsense. Do you know who you're laying hands on? Do you think I'm the same kind of person as you? No, we really aren't the same. You may have a pretty face, but your head is filled with nothing but vicious schemes. You're just a despicable coward who bullies the young master. Judith coldly watched the woman being dragged away. Sarah still tried to call for Carl's help, but one of the maids beside her clamped a hand over her mouth. Quiet. Shut up. Once the knights get here, they won't be nearly this polite. Sarah was finally removed completely. Mother, why are you treating her like this? Sarah was only trying to help me. Carl was still pleading on behalf of that poisonous woman. Hearing such absurd words, the anger in Isabella's heart could no longer be contained. Do you even know what you're saying? You drove away your tutors because of her. You even wanted to throw up everything you ate. Have you lost your mind? Carl lowered his head in grievance. But she said, only then would my brother come back. Still not awake yet, Isabella suddenly seized her son by the shoulders. Do you think Eugene would be happy to see you like this? Looking into his mother's eyes, blazing with anger, Carl was completely stunned. In all his memories, this was the first time she had ever been so furious. I just wanted my brother to come back. Why can't mother understand me? Did I really do something wrong? Carl lowered his head, his heart full of grievance and confusion. He had thought that if he paid a price, he could bring back the person dearest to him. That's enough, Your Grace. Please stop. Judith stepped forward in time and gently pressed a hand against Isabella's arm. The one you should blame is that maid called Sarah. Young Master Carl is still too young, after all. Isabella turned sharply toward her, her voice full of unwillingness and urgency. He isn't an ordinary child. He's a genius who could form memories at 2 or 3 years old. He has the mind of an adult. But Judith did not back down. Instead, she struck straight at the truth. Precisely because he's that kind of genius. He believed such absurd nonsense. No matter how smart he seems, he's still only 8 years old. His life has only just begun. He hasn't lived through the long years adults have. No matter how high his intelligence is, immaturity is only natural, even if he can understand profound books and solve the hardest problems. Judith looked at Carl gently, but her tone was incomparably firm. He is still only a child who has lived for 8 years. That is what we adults are for, staying by his side and teaching him the things no book ever can. Carl stood there frozen. It was the first time he had felt that someone had truly seen through his fragility. It is an honor to meet you, young master. I am Judith Allen. I'm happy to meet you too. I am Carl Mayos. Looking at the little boy in front of her, returning the greeting with such grave sincerity, Judith's heart almost melted. How could he be this adorable? But she did not forget the important thing. Crouching down to meet Carl at eye level, Judith said, Young master, Sarah was wrong. If Eugene saw you like this now, he would be heartbroken. You must remember this. No one wants the person they love to suffer from illness. Why do you think your brother left? He entrusted this family and your parents all to you. But what are you doing now? Is this how you repay his trust? Carl clenched his fists tightly and protested unwillingly. You do not understand what my brother was thinking. Sarah was always the one closest to him since childhood. Sarah, Isabella finally exploded completely. She could not stand hearing that name any longer. If Eugene really cared that much about her, do you think he would have left without even a single word for her? That question struck Carl's heart like a hammer. But he still refused to admit he was wrong. Then what is different about Baron Allen? Carl cried out loudly. Why should I believe her? Of course it is different. Because she is carrying your brother's child. The bomb Isabella dropped stunned everyone present. The air seemed to freeze solid in that very instant. That's right. Baron Allen was once your brother's most beloved lover. And she is carrying your future little nephew. Are you satisfied now? Carl's mind instantly went blank. Please stand up first. Carl suddenly became flustered. He had read in books that it was bad for pregnant women to stay crouched for too long. If you're my brother's lover. Carl edged closer carefully. Then do you know where my brother is now? Judith fell silent for a moment, and a trace of loneliness flashed in her eyes. In the end, he still left. The light in Carl's eyes gradually dimmed. Looking at the woman before him, devastated for his brother's sake, only one thought remained in his heart. Since my brother is not here, then I must take his place and take care of this pitiful woman, and also that little nephew who had not yet been born. Has he completely lost his mind? He abandoned his lover and did not even want his own child, and ran away all by himself like that? Carl stomped his feet in fury and shouted at his mother. Even if he is my real brother, I absolutely will not take his side. In his eyes, that once admired older brother had now turned into a complete scumbag. If it were not for my little nephew, I would wish he had never existed. The more Carl spoke, the more emotional he became. He even began apologizing to his unborn nephew. I am sorry, little nephew. I am sorry, Baroness. On behalf of that heartless brother of mine, I sincerely apologize to you. But who would have thought that the person being cursed by the whole family was at that very moment hiding behind a nearby clump of bushes, hearing every word clearly. He had expected a deadlock, but this Baron Allen turned out to be such a gentle person. Sarah had clearly instructed him to do everything exactly as she said. Yet the woman before him was nothing like the frightening figure of rumor. If anything, being around her felt incredibly reassuring. What was this strange sense of closeness? When does the Baroness plan to officially move into the ducal estate? After I have spoken with the Duke, completed the marriage registration, and we have made it public to everyone. So you came specially today because Sarah delayed you. Since we're going to be family from now on, does that mean I can call you sister-in-law instead? Faced with Carl's sudden affection, Judith naturally did not refuse. In this household, having one more ally was far better than one more enemy. Since we are already family, sister-in-law does not have to be so polite when talking to me anymore. No problem. We will do as you say. But when my brother comes back, I am definitely going to give him a good scolding. I really do not know what bad habits he picked up outside. He does not have even the slightest manners. Seeing Carl act so much like a little adult, Judith could only smile awkwardly and silently worry for the husband she had not even properly met yet. It seemed that the most troublesome person in this family was actually that brother who had not shown his face. Since my brother is not home, then he entrusted this whole family to me. By that logic, sister-in-law, you, and the baby in your belly are under my protection now too. Even if my brother never comes back, you must not worry. I will protect you in his place until the very end. When this child is awake, he acts so mature, yet looking at Carl sleeping quietly, he was still only a child after all. In this state, he really was rather lovable. But before that peace could last for long, a strange knocking sound suddenly came from the wardrobe in the room. With a noise like that, there was probably no one else but that man. Did he really have nothing better to do all day? Why was he still here now? Could it be that he had been hiding in there from morning till night, stalking me? It seems this gentleman has far more free time than I imagined. Judith had thought Egan was hiding inside just to watch the show, but unexpectedly, he said that if anything had gone wrong earlier, he had been ready to rush out and save the situation at any moment. Before Judith could react, he grabbed her and pulled her into the wardrobe. How on earth did you manage that? Were you really hiding here all this time just because you were curious about this? Actually, the plan was simple. I first had someone send a letter asking for the tea party to be moved to the garden, because I knew that at that time, Sarah would definitely go to Carl with his medicine, as long as I knew where everyone was. The rest was only a matter of timing. I simply told the Duchess that Carl was in danger. When it concerns her own son, that lady would never overthink it. She would definitely come with me at once. To be honest, I did not expect the Duchess to be that terrifying when she was angry. But whenever it concerns a child, any mother would become like that, would she not? And honestly, that scene just now was very satisfying. As for that maid Sarah, the Duke and Duchess will naturally deal with her. The only thing I am worried about now, that is whether Carl was frightened. Sir, if you keep staring at me like that, are you trying to bore a hole right through my face? To Judith's surprise, Egan, who is usually so cold, actually said thank you, something utterly unprecedented. What exactly was he thanking her for? It turned out that everything Judith had said to Carl in a room just now, Egan, hidden in the wardrobe, had heard. Every single word clearly. That kind of gentleness, free of any prejudice, made even Egan, hiding in the shadows, unable to help but sigh in admiration. He leaned close to Judith's ear and softly said that those words had been truly warm. Judith, you really are a good person. The sudden praise left Judith momentarily dazed. Do not tell me you have fallen for me. Seeing Egan freeze on the spot, Judith pressed her advantage. Is it because today you discovered that I am not only exceptionally clever, but also especially kind-hearted? So now you are completely smitten with me? The distance between them was far too close. Egan became so flustered that even his words started stumbling. But before he could explain, Judith let out a sigh first. Your confession came at the wrong time. After all, I am about to become this family's daughter-in-law. As a responsible person, I do not want to casually take a lover while I am married. Just when Egan was getting so dizzy from all that he could barely think, Judith suddenly added, however, I am not planning to reject you completely either. Judith was practically rattling her abacus beads right in front of the Duke's face. She said that if he really wanted to develop things with her, then at the very least, he would have to let her see his real face someday. If you perform well enough, I will put you on my list of candidates for my second marriage. That left Egan completely dumbstruck. He could not help complaining, you have not even had your first marriage yet, and you are already planning your second? Judith answered with complete confidence. Once this contract is over, Not only will all my debts be paid off, I will also have plenty of money in hand. After suffering for half my life, should I not enjoy myself properly? Egen still would not give up and reminded her not to forget that she supposedly still liked Egen. But Judith was perfectly clear-headed. That man has been missing for 5 years. I have to think about my own future too. What is the point of clinging to someone who may already be dead? Judith's imagination had still not stopped. She even started speculating. What if that missing fiancé were still alive, but horribly disfigured? In that case, she absolutely would not be able to accept him. Egen was so stunned he practically went numb and could not help demanding. So if the other person became ugly, you would dump him without hesitation? How can you be that cruel? Judith struck right back like a venomous snake. Why are you so worked up? Do not tell me some woman dumped you before because you were too ugly. That one sentence choked Egen silent. He could only forcibly change the subject and urge Judith to calm down. Judith, you're still very young. Since you will have plenty of money and plenty of time in the future, there's really no need to be in such a hurry to start scouting out a second husband. Judith was silent for a moment. If I truly had a family, maybe you would be right. But you also know that the place I grew up in was rotten to the core. And that was not a family I had any choice in. I was just unlucky enough to be born to those parents. In a low voice, Judith confessed that although it was awful to say, she had actually been a little envious of that young master just now. Because in all her memories, her parents had never once even gotten angry at her, much less rushed about anxiously for her safety like this. So in this world, there was something colder than scolding, the complete indifference of one's parents. That was why Judith had decided she would choose her own family with her own hands. Only then, even if everything ended in disaster, would she never regret it. And for some reason, she had this confidence that her future days would definitely be prosperous and splendid. As she spoke, she suddenly leaned closer. Smiling at Egen, Judith said, "In that case, I will give you a chance to. I do not mind that you are a commoner. As long as you have money in your pocket, are competent at your work, and are willing to work hard, then I might take a liking to you." But Judith added one more step. "Although your conditions are not bad, I cannot guarantee that I will like the face hidden under that mask." Just as Egen was being teased so badly that he no longer knew what to say, Carl's uneasy voice suddenly came from outside. It seemed the child had been frightened in his sleep. Judith immediately put away her joking manner, softly bade Egen farewell, and told him to find a chance to slip away later by himself. With the click of the wardrobe door, the cramped space was left with Egen alone. He touched his mask and laughed at himself. That woman really could act so naturally. The next day, another invitation arrived. But this time, the sender was Duke Mias himself. Egen came over early in the morning and loitered shamelessly in Judith's room, even leisurely drinking tea. Looking at how completely at ease he was, anyone who did not know better would think he was the master of the room. What was even more absurd was that when Judith was preparing to go out, he naturally acted like family and said he would accompany her. In response to Judith's questioning, he came up with a grand-sounding excuse. He said that since some top-secret matter was happening inside the ducal estate, then as the leader of the Gray Intelligence Agency, of course he had to personally keep watch. He clearly just wanted to follow along, yet insisted on making it sound as though he were toiling for official business. Judith boarded the carriage, but inwardly he was muttering to herself. Could it be because yesterday she casually mentioned liking men who were passionate about their work, and that was why the masked man was acting so eager today? Still, Judith was not worried that he would do anything reckless outside. She had already warned him that no matter how much he liked her, he had to keep his distance in public. Judging by how clever he was, he should at least have that much sense. Leaning by the window and watching the scenery rush backward, Judith suddenly found herself thinking that if the face beneath the mask was at least decent looking, then perhaps she really could seriously consider this man. But for a lifelong matter like this, she would have to observe him for at least a few months. For now, it was better to put away all these messy thoughts. After all, the real battle waiting at the ducal estate had not even begun. At the servant's announcement, Judith formally stepped through the gates of the Mias ducal estate. The garden was filled with blooming red roses, as if welcoming this long-planned feast. Judith knew very well that today was the final hurdle. Once she crossed this threshold, she would completely secure her place as the Myas family's contractual daughter-in-law. As soon as she entered the hall, two completely different voices reached her ears. One politely addressed her as Baroness, while the other casually called her sister-in-law. Before Judith could even steady herself, Isabella spoke first, asking exactly whom she had come to see. The Duchess had clearly been waiting there specifically for her, yet she still stubbornly insisted that she was only here to apologize, not because she wanted to see any Baroness. Beside her, Carl did not bother hiding it at all. He rushed up, grabbed Judith, and loudly declared that he simply wanted to see his sister-in-law. The scene left Isabella looking somewhat awkward. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, she remarked, "The roses in the flower beds are blooming beautifully." Judith did not react at first and even thought she had misheard. But Isabella immediately turned her head away and muttered that she was merely talking to herself. Looking at the awkward-tempered Duchess, Judith suddenly understood. This was not flower appreciation at all. It was plainly her own way of welcoming this daughter-in-law home. It seemed Isabella had still been thinking about yesterday's roses. It was only because someone caused trouble that she had not been able to show them to Judith. When it came to expressing fondness, this Duchess was indeed adorably clumsy. Just as everyone was about to take their seats, a man's voice came from across the table. He teased that this was truly a rare sight. After all, this should be the first time Isabella and Carl had both taken a liking to the same person. Isabella instantly retorted, telling him not to exaggerate. At most, she merely thought Judith was still passably suitable. Judith knew very well that the man sitting there drinking tea was the head of the Myas family. Putting away her earlier ease, Judith bowed gracefully and formally announced her name. Seated upon that golden chair was the supreme authority of the Myas family, Ben Myas. He merely sat there in silence, yet without doing anything at all. The pressure of a ruler already poured off him overwhelmingly. Ben looked at Judith before him and greeted her in a steady tone, saying he was pleased to meet Baron Aelin. So this was the famed iron-blooded duke, his whole being carried an icy severity, as though he had been forged from steel itself. The pressure he gave off was simply too sharp. "Do not just stand there, Baroness. Come sit down." "Yes, sir. I only came to greet sister-in-law, so I should be going now." "Sister-in-law, good luck. You can definitely do it." "Thank you. What a lovely child." "Then let us begin the serious business. These are the Duchy's chief physicians. They will assist throughout the following procedures. I am Bart Carlin. I have served as the Duke's chief physician for over 10 years. Bart Carlin? In the original novel, he was clearly one of the Emperor's people. The Myas family was rich enough to rival nations, and their power could even contend with the imperial family. They had always been a thorn in the Emperor's side. To keep the ducal house in check, the Emperor had made several quiet moves recently, and this Bart Carlin was the deepest hidden piece he had planted here. He was His Majesty's most loyal servant. After lying low for so many years, he was finally about to fulfill his greatest wish. He was the Emperor's most trusted confidant, and also the true culprit who, 1 year later, would cause the deaths of the Duke and Duchess. I actually forgot about this man. Bart is mainly responsible for my health. Of course, he also oversees the nutritional balance of the whole family's meals. Someone who controls an entire family's food could take anyone's life with ease. So that is how it is. Understood. I am Hyde Ramus, 21 years old. I have been at the ducal estate for 2 years. He is a rare genius. He never once lost first place at the medical academy. I personally evaluated him before bringing him here. He is mainly responsible for the health of Carl and me, especially Carl, who often suffers indigestion. Hyde prepares his medicine every day, so that meant he probably had nothing to do with Bart. In the original novel, this person had never even been mentioned. But at a crucial moment like this, any variable not in the plan could not be underestimated. You understand why I call them here, do you not? Yes. As everyone knows, the direct bloodline of the Myas family possesses a special energy from the moment they are in the womb, and only each successive family head can sense that energy. So, as long as we have a doctor's pregnancy diagnosis, plus the Duke's signature confirming the child is of the direct bloodline, then we can publicly claim that Aegon can still live for at least a few more months. As long as this contract takes effect, the imperial family can do nothing to us. But in the end, this was still a reckless gamble meant to deceive the heavens. Leaving out the variable named Bart was indeed an accident. But since they were only planning to move against the Duke and Duchess a year later, he definitely would not dare contact the Emperor rashly right now. In the original novel, that was how events unfolded too. Duke, the documents are all ready. I am sorry to trouble you with forging these things, but I hope you can understand a father's feelings. Very well. You need not concern yourselves with the rest. You may all withdraw. Yes, we shall take our leave. The marriage registration will be completed soon. From now on, you will officially remain at the ducal estate. I will have someone bring over all your old luggage. Very well, I understand. In that case, from now on, you may simply call me Judith. After all, for the next few months, we will nominally be one family. There is no need to be so distant. However, speaking of luggage, Judith, the clothes you brought may be in fairly good condition, but the styles are simply far too outdated. They have gone out of fashion long ago. It seemed that in this house, what needed changing was not only her status, but also her shabby appearance. How could Amaya's family's daughter-in-law go out dressed like this? Even if this is only a contractual relationship, you must show some sense of responsibility. Do not disgrace the family. Of course, I will do my utmost. I will have suitable clothes prepared immediately. In that case, do not just sit there. Hurry up and get up. Right now, the first thing we must do is go shopping. Seriously shopping. And completely renew your wardrobe. It seemed this Duchess not only had a fierce temper, but also astonishingly swift action. This dress was inspired by the elegance of a white swan. Buy it. Next. By contrast, this one is called Black Swan. Buy it. Next. Whether it was the pure white style or the cool elegance of black, whenever Judith wore it, the Duchess had only one response. Buy them all. Keep changing. This was not clothes shopping at all. This was emptying out the entire boutique. There are still a few left, but every single one suits her perfectly. I do not think we even need to look at the rest. Just pay for them. Madam, there's only one last gown left. Then let us look at it too. This really is the last one. If you get tired, you must tell me. Actually, I'm not that tired. I just think, have you perhaps bought a little too much? Looking at the mountain of gowns piled up, Judith finally could not help reminding her softly. Because I do not have a daughter of my own, and this is also my first time coming to a place like this. It is not because I feel especially close to you. I'm doing this simply because I want to, so you do not need to feel burdened at all. This Duchess was truly textbook Sundara. Her mouth said one thing, while the bill in her hand grew longer and longer. All right, go try on the last one. Very well. Since mother-in-law had spoken, Judith could only obediently cooperate. Oof. Such needless worrying. Since every single one suits her this well, how can I not buy them? What do you think? At last, the designer could not hold back any longer and asked the question he most wanted answered. If I may be so bold, what exactly is this young lady's relationship to you? She is my future daughter-in-law. What? The designer froze on the spot and took a long time to recover. Is he ready to draw back the curtain? Quickly, let me see. Isabella was already too impatient to wait. She was even already calculating what sort of shoes would go with it. Then, with a swish, the curtain was drawn open. The entire room fell instantly silent. Looking at Judith before her, Isabella could not speak for a long while. Does this dress not suit me? Seeing her mother-in-law's serious expression, Judith felt somewhat nervous and thought perhaps she looked too strange. No, this one suits you best. Isabella finally found her voice again, her tone unable to hide its amazement. Could he go out wearing this right now? No problem, madam. Then prepare it. And by the way, get rid of all those rags she came here in. Though she always spoke coldly, it really did seem she liked Judith very much. Judith's heart felt warm. This feeling of being openly favored by someone. That was something she was experiencing for the first time. But can I really wear all these clothes? After that, the frantic shopping continued. By the time they returned to the estate, the sun had already set. After the whole day, Judith was utterly exhausted. She had thought she could finally rest, but then the Duchess brought her to an entirely new place. From now on, you will stay here. Looking at the incomparably luxurious room before her, Judith was completely stunned. This is Egan's bedroom. Since you are his wife, sharing his room is only natural, is it not? Knock, knock, knock. Sister-in-law, may I come in? Judith had only just sat down when her brother-in-law Carl's voice sounded from outside the door. "Please come in." As the door opened, Carl entered with Hyde. But before he could even steady himself, he froze where he stood. Wow, what happened? Seeing Carl stand there with his mouth hanging open, Judith looked utterly confused. "So my brother likes people this beautiful?" "Oh, thank you for the compliment." Judith was a little embarrassed by the praise and could only respond politely. "Sister-in-law is really beautiful, right, Hyde?" "Yes, she really is very beautiful." Even Hyde, who is usually so indifferent, could only nod along in agreement. "Rest for a while now. Come downstairs again at dinner time." "All right. I will come down soon." Once Carl and Hyde left and the door shut softly behind them, the taut string in Judith finally snapped. Phew, I really did not think this through at all. Looking around this luxurious bedroom full of a man's presence, Judith was hit belatedly by a wave of panic. She really was going to live in the young Duke's room. This was not as simple as changing into another dress. When Egan came back, how exactly was she supposed to face this nominal husband of hers? Traces of his life were everywhere here. Although a great deal of time had already passed, every corner of the room had been kept spotless. It seemed the Duke and Duchess had always been waiting for him to return. They had kept this place exactly as it used to be. They had done it so that the moment he pushed open the door, he would not feel even the slightest sense of unfamiliarity. This feeling of being deeply missed by one's family made Judith's heart ache. But just as she was sinking into that sadness, a strange sound suddenly came from behind her. The sudden noise startled Judith. Could it be? That's right. It's me. You can relax now. What? Who is there? It was none other than the long-vanished Egan. Late at night, Ben had brought him all the way out to this desolate place. No matter how he looked at it, something felt off about this place. Egan could not help asking his father, "Why are we here?" The room was covered in dust, clearly having been abandoned for a very long time. Who could have imagined that inside this dilapidated house was a secret passage leading directly to the ducal estate? Ben lowered his voice and warned him to keep close. This place is like a maze. Take one wrong turn and you will never get out. Egan found it strange. For such an important place, why was Carl not brought here too? Ben stopped walking, and his tone turned exceptionally solemn. Because this secret can only be known by the head of the family and the future heir. It sounded like a kind of privilege, but the price behind it was an unimaginably heavy. That responsibility. Ben's tone turned so cold it was chilling. If the family should ever face utter destruction, the family head must survive by any means necessary. Only then will the name Myas not disappear. Egan clearly could not accept that logic. To save one's own life, must one simply stand by and watch one's family die? Ben did not refute him. Instead, he threw the problem back to him. To survive alone and continue the bloodline, or to fight to the end for everyone. That is the choice the family head must make. Egan fell into conflict. He did not want to survive alone, but neither did he want to see the family completely destroyed. Hearing his son's answer, Ben actually revealed a gratified smile. So on this path full of sacrifice, father and son had thought alike in a way that was almost startling. Egan had once thought his father's back looked so towering. He had even sworn that for the rest of his life, he would protect the Myas family with his life, just as his father did. But those words had been spoken too soon. At the time, he did not yet know how cruel the truth about the family head's heir really was. Looking at the path before him, Egan knew very well that he ought to have completely left the ducal estate behind and never returned again. But when he heard Carl was in danger, he still could not stop himself from sneaking back in again and again. Since things had already reached this point, even knowing there was a pit of fire ahead, he could only push this door open. Inwardly, Egan swore to himself that this would absolutely be the last time he took such a risk and infiltrated the ducal estate. The dull knocking startled Judith inside the room. Before she could react, Egan's voice came from behind the bookshelf. "Do not just stand there. Give me a hand. I cannot push this door open from inside by myself." Though Judith looked utterly speechless, she still followed his instructions and pulled several specific books from the shelf in sequence. As the mechanism turned with a grinding sound, the bookcase wall that looked like solid stone finally slowly moved aside before Judith's eyes. Looking at the hidden passage before her, Judith muttered inwardly, "Where exactly does this place lead? Some outsider can come and go as if this were his own home." The ducal estate's security is far too lax. What is wrong with you? Egan suddenly snapped back to himself. But unexpectedly, Egan, who was usually as calm and cold as a block of ice, softly said that he had just been startled. Am I prettier than usual today? Do not tell me you have once again hopelessly fallen for me. She said that before the official divorce, he should restrain himself a little. After all, in name, I'm still the wife of the Myers family. That single word, wife, threw Egan's heart into complete turmoil. What would happen if he restored his identity as Duke now and returned to that home? His father and mother would surely be overjoyed. After all, they had waited for this day for far too long. Even little Carl would probably jump up in excitement. But Judith alone, if he revealed the truth now, she would absolutely leave without a backward glance. Because it was written clearly in that cold contract. The moment the Duke returned, her task would be completely over. Could he really bear that price? But then another thought struck him. What if Judith were willing to stay? After all, she had once truly had feelings for him. She had even mentioned wanting to build a family soon. If that were really the case, perhaps the two of them could turn pretense into reality and become a true married couple. But the very next second, Egan was shocked by his own thoughts. This is madness. What nonsense was I even thinking just now? Thoughts like that were far too dangerous. If he kept wavering like this, something terrible would happen sooner or later. It seemed that in the future, he absolutely could not keep casually returning in the Duke's identity. Seeing Egan standing there lost in thought, Judith took the initiative to break the silence and asked whether he was feeling unwell. Egan quickly came back to himself and said he was fine, but Judith's next word surprised him. She wanted to ask about someone, the estate physician Bart. At the mention of Bart, Egan's tone grew serious. He said Bart was an old servant of the ducal house. He had worked there for a full 15 years. Not only was his medical skill impeccable, he was also deeply loyal to the family. Why had Judith suddenly brought up such a crucial figure? Judith felt something was wrong. Since Dr. Bart himself had worked with assistants for 5 years before, why did he not have even one assistant now? Egan explained that perhaps there had simply been no vacancy when they were hiring, or perhaps Bart was just used to working alone, or maybe both. But right then, Judith suddenly stopped. Her expression became unusually serious as she asked Egan whether his promise to repay her for saving his life still stood. Egan paused, then nodded and said that of course it did. But he still could not help adding that as long as it was not something too troublesome involving the ducal territory. Judith's next sentence, however, made the atmosphere instantly drop to freezing point. She said the matter was not only troublesome, but extremely serious. Because this time, it was not just one person in danger. Judith's next words were like a bombshell. She said that within the ducal estate, 3 people might have been poisoned. Hearing that, Egan was stunned. He had clearly not expected things to be this serious. Before he could even react, Judith looked straight into his eyes and firmly asked, "Help me, please." Isabella could not help sighing. With parents that irresponsible, this child had still grown up so wonderfully. Not only was she beautiful, hard-working, and kind-hearted, but especially when caring for Carl, her attentiveness was beyond praise. Ben, sitting nearby, listened in silence as he drank his tea. Isabella felt guilty that this child's marriage prospects had been delayed, so she suggested that when a suitable chance appeared in the future, she would personally arrange it and make sure Judith married a good man. Marry? Isabella suddenly called out to Ben. Ben coughed awkwardly and, in a calm voice, reminded her that no matter how much she liked this child now, they only had a contract relationship with Judith for a few months. Once the time was up, they would be strangers. In his view, buying her those gorgeous clothes and jewels as compensation was already more than enough. But Isabella did not buy it at all. She countered that the child had saved Carl's life. Did he truly think a little kindness like that could repay a life-saving debt? Ben was silent for a moment and admitted that it was indeed not enough. But he felt that personally arranging Judith's marriage was an entirely different matter. Are you planning to act as her bargain parents? What if she pushes for more in the future and tries to use the Myers family's name? Isabella remained very calm. She said that Judith was not that kind of person, and even if something truly happened, she certainly would not stand by and ignore it. In the end, Ben relented. If you insist, then do as you please. Though I do not trust that woman, I trust you absolutely. Isabella snorted after hearing this. She knew her husband far too well. No matter how tough Ben acted now, he was the classic type whose bark was harsher than his heart. Once he spent enough time with that child, the rewards and affection he gave her would probably exceed even hers. Then let us just wait and see. We will see how much longer this Thunder family head can hold out. The study was quiet. Ben was drinking black tea and reading the documents in his hands, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Just then, a knock at the door suddenly broke the silence. "Duke, this is Judith Allen. May I trouble you for a little of your time?" Ben set down his teacup and said calmly toward the door, "Come in." But then he added a warning first. "If you came to see me about public business, then we can talk." Ben directly dismissed the maid, saying he already had something to drink. Clearly, he did not want outsiders present for the coming conversation. The moment the door shut tightly, only the two of them remained in the room. Staring at the cup of tea, Judith asked whether this was the medicine prescribed by Baron Bart. Ben did not think anything was strange and replied frankly that he drank it every day at this hour. In fact, Bart had even come personally this morning to examine him. It seemed this Baron Bart held a very special place in Ben's trust. Ben behaved generously, promising that as long as Judith remained here, he would treat her as family. Then he asked why she had come. Judith did not beat around the bush and said it concerned the marriage registration. There was something that had been bothering her. Ben was patient and told her to speak plainly. In his view, Judith might have regretted it after all. After all, pregnancy, marriage, and then divorce. For a woman, that was certainly no easy matter. But Judith's next words completely exceeded his expectations. She said that her birthday had only just passed, and she had only just come of age. If they announced the pregnancy now, that would mean she had already conceived Egan's child while still underage. That would ruin the young Duke's reputation. Judith continued calmly, saying that this was not merely a matter of personal honor, but would implicate the reputation of the entire ducal territory. Ben fell silent after hearing that. He had originally thought Judith was merely a woman taking money to do a job, someone who would grab the benefits and leave. He had never expected her to think so carefully, even considering Egan's honor and the honor of the entire family. His opinion of her shifted subtly. It seemed this daughter-in-law was indeed far cleverer than he had expected. Ben was calculating the timing of the registration, wanting to finish the matter before the announcement of Egan's death. But Judith suddenly raised a hand and interrupted him directly. Ben had clearly not yet reacted when Judith, wearing a serious expression, said outright that there was something wrong with the taste of the tea. There was a strange smell to it. Judith knew very well that ever since she had met the Duke and Duchess, certain doubts had lingered in her mind. What secret was hidden in this medicinal tea they drank every day? According to the original novel, the Duke and Duchess would die a year later. But when Judith saw them with her own eyes, neither showed any signs of illness. If their bodies were not visibly failing, then the only explanation was that Baron Bart had been poisoning them in secret all along, laying the groundwork for their deaths. But if that were true, then another new question arose. If Bart wanted to wipe out the family completely, then how had Carl, the heir, survived in the original story? Had Bart somehow failed? Or was Carl's constitution special enough to let him escape death? Judith suddenly remembered something. The Duchess had mentioned that a man named Hyde prepared medicine for Carl every day, supposedly to treat his stomach pain. That gave Judith an extremely bold hypothesis. She had immediately sought out Egan and told him to keep watch on the Duke's tea-drinking time. But Egan clearly knew little about what was happening inside the estate. He had even spoken for Bart, convinced that the man was absolutely loyal. Judith could not be bothered arguing with him. She bluntly ordered him to do exactly as she said. Judith knew very well that if her intuition was wrong this time, the consequences would be beyond what she could bear. But she could not simply sit and wait for death either. She could only gamble once. She told Ben directly that she wanted to examine the tea. Ben was clearly hesitant, but under Judith's insistence, he finally relented and indicated that she could inspect it. After taking the teacup and thanking him, Judith immediately leaned in to examine it. She sniffed the tea, and her tone turned extremely serious. She concluded that the strange smell came from it, and she immediately stopped Ben from continuing to drink. She even named Bart outright and demanded they bring in that doctor. This left Ben utterly baffled. To cover her own secret, Judith improvised a lie on the spot, saying that in the past, to repay debts, she had once worked as a tutor in a medicinal herb merchant's house. Through constant exposure there, she had learned to distinguish herbs by scent. Although that story was entirely fabricated, as long as it calmed Ben for the moment, and made him believe the tea was poisoned, Judith's plan would already be half successful. Judith laid it all out directly. She said the smell of the tea was very similar to that of a poisonous herb. Though she could not name it, this herb was extremely insidious. In the early stages, poisoning showed no symptoms at all, but in the end it could quietly take a person's life without a sound. Ben could no longer sit still. Incredulous, he pressed her. "Are you saying this tea is poisoned right now?" Judith, however, remained humble and said that she was not an expert after all. To be safe, they should have Dr. Hyde examine it. After all, health was most important. This was not something to be careless about. Looking at Judith's expression, Ben felt his heart jolt. He realized this was no joke. The woman's eyes were too serious. He immediately summoned the butler and issued a string of secret instructions. Not only was Hyde to be brought over at once, but all the tea usually drunk by Isabella and Carl was to be sealed up as well. He specifically warned the butler that the matter must be carried out in complete secrecy. No one was to notice anything at all. Dr. Hyde hurried over, assuming that something major had happened. When he discovered it was merely because of a few cups of tea, he was somewhat surprised. Ben wasted no time and asked him directly whether he could detect poison. Hyde felt that it was unlikely, because the ducal estate was so tightly guarded that poisonous herbs should never have had a chance to get in. Just as things reached a deadlock, Judith suddenly interjected. She asked Hyde whether there were substances that were harmless separately, but when mixed together, turned into deadly poison. Hyde paused in surprise, but had no choice except to admit that such cases did indeed exist. If that were true, then the poisoner was very clever indeed. Such a method of killing without leaving a trace would be impossible to detect through ordinary examination. With that one sentence, Judith struck directly at the heart of the problem. Judith wanted to see Bart's prescriptions, but Dr. Hyde refused. His reason was that Bart had seniority, and casually inspecting his records would be disrespectful to a senior. Ben expressed the same stance. He believed Judith meant well, but he did not believe the tea was poisoned, because after he and Isabella drank it, they genuinely felt better. Especially Isabella. After their second son, Egan, disappeared, she had completely collapsed. It was only thanks to this tea that she recovered her energy. Judith let out a cold laugh when she heard that and threw out one fatal question. If this tea was so effective, why did young Master Carl still suffer stomach pains every day? If this tea really strengthened the body, then why was Carl alone forced to take medicine daily after drinking it? Judith's words tore apart the illusion of perfection in an instant. If for adults it was a tonic, but for a child it became poison, then the truth behind it was likely even more terrifying than poisoning itself. Judith knew very well that if she could not produce stronger evidence, there was no way to persuade Ben. Just as she was about to forcibly stop them, Dr. Hyde suddenly halted. It was as though something had abruptly occurred to him, and he muttered that he had overlooked a crucial detail. He asked everyone to wait a moment. Clearly, Judith's words had triggered some professional blind spot in him. The deadlock that had seemed unbreakable suddenly turned around because of Hyde's reaction. What had he realized that could make a professional physician wear such an expression of sudden awakening? Judith finally dared to confirm that her deduction was entirely correct. This was no tonic at all, but a carefully designed slow poison. Bart's goal was vicious. He wanted this family of 3 to die within a year without anyone noticing. With this sort of long-term, gradual infiltration, no one would ever be able to determine the cause of death. But he had miscalculated one thing: Carl's physical reaction. After drinking the poisoned tea, Carl developed stomach pain, and that became the life-saving signal. To ease the stomach pain, Dr. Hyde had prescribed Carl another medicine. Who could have guessed that he would become the poison's nemesis? Because of that accidental twist of fate, Carl became the sole survivor. Meanwhile, Ben and Isabella were steadily walking toward death. This was no healing prescription at all. It was a death warrant. If Judith had not seen through everything, the Myers family would have been destroyed long ago. Dr. Hyde's conclusion plunged the entire room into dead silence. Facing Ben, he admitted that the tea really was poisoned. Just as Miss Judith had said, some herbs are harmless on their own, but once mixed together, they become lethal toxins. And all 3 cups of tea before them contained that component. Hyde gave this poison a name, the patient assassin. The most terrifying thing about it was how deceptive it was. In the early stages of poisoning, it made people feel energetic and even think they had become healthier. But that was merely a final flash before death. Continue taking it long enough, and only death awaited them. The sense of improving health that Ben and Isabella had taken such pride in was in fact the sound of death knocking at the door. Hyde finally determined that Carl suffered stomach pain because a child's body was more sensitive to this toxin. After hearing that, Isabella's heart turned cold. She hastily asked about her son's current condition and whether he was in danger right now. Fortunately, the stomach medicine Hyde had prescribed earlier had accidentally contained an antidote. It was an herb called desert dandelion, specially effective against the patient assassin. Hyde had only discovered at the time that it worked on Carl's stomach pain, which was why he had kept him taking it consistently. Who could have imagined that this would turn out to be the key to saving his life? If Dr. Hyde had not discovered that stomach medicine, then 1 year later, there probably would not have been a single survivor left alive in this estate. Suppressing his unease, Ben asked Hyde whether Isabella and he had already been poisoned too. Fortunately, Hyde gave an affirmative answer that they had not yet shown abnormalities, so there was still time. But Ben's next question plunged the atmosphere to freezing point. He wanted to know whether this could possibly be some sort of misunderstanding. After all, Bart was a veteran physician. He knew perfectly well that the constitutions of those 3 people were different, yet he still gave them the same tea. Even after Carl developed stomach pain, he had not adjusted the formula in the slightest. Such a low-level mistake could never happen to Bart. The only explanation was that from the very beginning, he had wanted them dead. This was not some medical accident at all. It was a murder plot planned long in advance. Dr. Hyde gave his final professional judgment. The possibility that this was an accident was only 0.1%. In other words, this was a deliberate murder with a success rate exceeding 99%. Ben was silent for a long time before finally accepting the truth. He dismissed everyone present and strictly ordered them to keep their mouths shut. Absolutely no one was to speak of what had happened today. Just as Judith was about to leave, the Duke suddenly called out to her. The normally imposing head of the family spoke with an earnestness she had never heard before. Looking at Judith, he said, "You saved my entire family." At that moment, Judith finally earned the true trust of the Myers family. Faced with such sudden acknowledgement, she did not know how to respond. After all, not long ago, the Duke had still been full of wariness toward her, and suspicion. But now, the Duke let go of all pretenses and sincerely thanked Judith from the bottom of his heart. Late at night, the bedroom door was pushed open. Isabella urgently asked whether that man had confessed yet. As the Duke removed his gloves, he replied coolly that although the man had not confessed outright, faced with irrefutable evidence, he had no room left to deny it. Looking at the wreckage before him, the Duke confirmed the shocking truth. Bart had really intended to poison the entire family to death. Isabella simply could not understand why that Baron, who had always seemed so loyal, would do such a thing. The Duke sharply sensed that Bart must have had someone behind him. This matter was far from simple, but Isabella was even more grateful that Judith had been there. If Judith had not noticed it in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Still, the Duke also understood very well that Judith could have stood aside and done nothing, yet she chose to involve herself in this trouble. Did she do it to save people, or was she after something else? Isabella sighed that Judith was an upright child, and that the whole family now owed her yet another debt of gratitude. After hearing that, the Duke fell into thought. He made a decision on the spot. Even if Judith and Egan divorced in the future, the family still had to take full responsibility for her. Simply compensating her with a barony was nowhere near enough to match her contributions. The Duke had even already begun considering marrying her into an even more powerful count's family as lifelong security for her. Meanwhile, Egen looked at Judith and asked how she had seen through Bart's true nature. Judith gave a reason that sounded flawless. She said that, by chance, she had overheard Bart's secret at the Intelligence Guild. Egen was shocked because in everyone's eyes, Bart's loyalty to the family had once seemed beyond question. But he quickly discarded that naive way of thinking. In his view, Bart had never been loyal from the start. That supposed loyalty had merely been carefully rehearsed acting to achieve his goal. What Bart wanted was a perfect assassination that would leave no trace. That was why he had chosen a slow-acting but lethal poison. Egen had to admit that this possibility was extremely likely. That viper lurking at their side had been 100 times more sinister than they had imagined. Seeing that it was getting late, Judith urged Egen to leave, saying that the master of the room should rest as well. But Egen was not at all appreciative. He bluntly said that he was not tired in the slightest and seemed to have no intention of going. Seeing that, Judith joked directly, a man and a woman alone together late at night. "You're not trying to flirt with me, are you?" The question left Egen speechless. Helplessly, he retorted, "Do men and women have to have ulterior motives every time they're together?" But Judith refused to let it go, insisting that the chances were very high. The two bickered back and forth like that. And just as the atmosphere turned a little strange, a knock suddenly came from outside, breaking the silence in the room. Judith found it odd that someone would still come to visit at this hour. Hyde's voice came from outside the door. In an urgent tone, he said he had something important to discuss. Judith was just about to get up and open the door when Egen suddenly spoke. In a low voice, he asked, "Are you really going to let him in at a time like this?" Egen looked extremely irritated. He demanded to know whether Judith really intended to be alone in her room with that man. Judith found it baffling. What was there to make such a fuss about? But Egen insisted that a man visiting her late at night was obviously trying to use the opportunity to hit on her. Judith could not listen any longer. She thought Hyde had only come to discuss serious matters, so she hurriedly pushed Egen toward the door. But Egen still had not finished complaining. Staring at Judith's off-the-shoulder nightdress, he started picking apart her clothing, asking why she was not dressed more modestly. Judith answered irritably, "The Duchess threw away all my old clothes." Judith finally lost her patience. She sharply scolded Egen, telling him to stop embarrassing himself and disappear at once. Caught off guard by being yelled at, Egen had not even figured out what exactly he had done that was so embarrassing when Judith drove the point home, saying that the way he was acting now was exactly like some pathetic husband who suspects his wife of cheating and has come to catch her in the act. Locked outside the door, Egen stood there for a long while without recovering. His head was full of that one sentence. In Judith's eyes, had what he had just done really looked that much like an insanely jealous husband? After calming herself down, Judith invited Hyde inside. Hyde pushed the door open and entered, sounding a bit restrained. He politely greeted Judith and addressed her as Baroness. Hearing that distant title, Judith immediately waved her hand and told him to just call her Judith. She explained that until the wedding was officially held, any such title was just an empty shell, and being called by name made her feel much more comfortable. Seeing that, Hyde did not insist any further. He nodded in agreement. As Judith guided him to a seat, she politely asked whether he would like some tea. A late-night visit like this must mean something important, and she was already prepared to hear what Hyde wanted to talk about. Hyde declined the tea and frankly said that he really was not in the mood to drink. Judith sighed as well, admitting that she was not in the mood for pleasantries either, since neither of them had the mind for idle courtesy. Judith got straight to the point and asked why he had come so late. Had Bart already confessed? But Hyde shook his head, saying that even now, Bart still refused to say a thing. After a pause, he added that he had not come for official business this time, but for a personal matter of his own. Judith was a little surprised and did not understand what personal matter there could possibly be between the two of them. Hyde suddenly thanked her with great solemnity. He said that as the family doctor, he actually owed Judith a tremendous debt. As the physician of the household, he had failed to realize that there was something wrong with the medicine everyone had been drinking all along. Judith hurried to comfort him, saying he had only been practicing medicine for 2 years, so how could he have been expected to question a senior doctor? Besides, Bart had enjoyed everyone's trust. Hyde let out a helpless sigh and said he was grateful that Judith understood. In truth, he had always been constrained while working under Bart. In order to control everything, Bart had even deprived him of the right to write prescriptions and never let him touch anything important. Even so, Hyde still blamed himself, feeling that if only he had examined everything one more time more carefully, it might have helped. Judith sympathized with what he had gone through and frankly said that with his medical skills, he could have a bright future anywhere. Hyde only gave a bitter smile and said that while that might be true, the clinics outside did not pay anywhere near as much as the ducal estate. Hyde suddenly lowered his voice and confessed a secret to Judith. When he had signed that pregnancy certificate, it had completely violated his professional ethics. He admitted that even though he had known the truth, he had still accepted hush money and signed his name on the paper. Judith was stunned speechless. Hyde explained helplessly that he had 7 younger siblings at home, and for the sake of survival, he had had no choice. In order to send him to medical school, his family had sold their only farm. During the years he was studying, the entire family had survived only because his second younger brother supported them all alone. Now that he had finally completed his studies and returned, it was only right that he, as the eldest brother, should bear the burden of feeding the family. Judith felt a swirl of emotions after hearing that, and cautiously asked about his parents. In a calm tone, Hyde told her that his parents had died when he was very young. Realizing that she had asked something she should not have, Judith quickly apologized. Hyde casually said that his parents had died a long time ago, but Judith suddenly froze. This background sounded far too familiar. It was almost identical to the backstory of the missing eldest brother of the male lead in the novel, also adopted by farmers, also raising 7 younger siblings alone after his adoptive parents died. And in the end, he had also become an outstanding doctor. There could not possibly be 2 lives in this world that were that coincidentally alike. And Hyde's age matched perfectly too. Judith could hardly believe it. The man before her, who had violated his ethics for the sake of a salary, was actually a noble by birth. He was the long-lost eldest son the Marquis family had been searching for all these years. If she could play this card well, the entire situation from here on out could be turned completely around. Judith suddenly thought of another problem. If she helped Hyde find his birth parents, then what would become of his current younger siblings? If Hyde returned to the nobility, those children with no blood relation to him might very well be abandoned outright. Looking at the man before her, Judith softly asked whether it was hard supporting so many children alone while also enduring injustice at work. Judith bluntly told Hyde that if he could be ruthless, he could throw away all of those burdens at any time. He could go abroad alone, to a place where no one knew him, and start a new life. Or he could simply marry someone and use that as an excuse to sever ties with home completely. Faced with the temptation Judith laid out, Hyde fell into a long silence. He admitted that he had never once thought of abandoning his family as an option, but he quickly shook his head and said that he simply could not do it. Judith did not quite understand and asked why he insisted on carrying on. Looking out the window, Hyde said softly that every time he saw young Master Carl, he thought of his younger siblings at home. They were about that age as well. Even if he really hardened his heart and ran away for his own sake, the moment he saw children on the street, he would probably turn right back around. With a helpless, self-mocking laugh, Hyde said that he was just a pitiful doctor, using the excuse of for my family, while running around desperately trying to make money. Judith looked at the man before her. The cold test in her eyes softened into a gentle smile. At last, she saw his true nature. Judith personally comforted Hyde, saying that it only proved how deeply he loved his siblings. There was nothing pitiful at all about working hard to protect one's family. In order to ease his burden, Judith even confessed her own secret, saying that she was pretending to be pregnant in order to repay her debts. She told him that, on the contrary, his actions felt warm, and that she was even a little envious of his younger siblings for having such a wonderful older brother. Judith sighed sincerely that if she had had an older brother like that too, how happy she would have been. Hyde did not know how to react after hearing that. He said he was not nearly that great, only someone struggling through the mud. But he had never expected that in this cold mansion, someone would understand his hardship and even comfort him like this. Since their situations were similar, Judith took the initiative to suggest that from now on, they should look out for each other. Hyde was flattered and quickly nodded in agreement, saying that he would be very glad to. Looking at the man before her, Judith had already made up her mind. Someone as kind as Hyde should not be buried by life. She felt she had a responsibility to help this young man and free him from his current predicament. In her heart, Judith silently told Hyde to endure just a little longer. She would use all her strength to help him find his birth parents. The more Egan thought about it, the more wrong it felt. Coming to meet privately in the middle of the night, he really had a lot of nerve. What irritated him even more was that Judith had actually allowed that man to call her by name. He himself had waited a full 3 years to be granted that privilege, yet the other man had barely appeared and had already crossed that line so easily. Now he truly could not sit still any longer. Judith's remark about giving everyone a chance sounded to him like casting a net far and wide. As long as a man had money and ability, did being a commoner not matter either? The more Egan mulled it over, the more absurd it seemed. What exactly was this supposed to mean? But he soon gave a self-mocking shake of his head. This was not the time to be jealous. He had to force those thoughts aside first, because the trouble before him had already come knocking. Egan knew very well that he had to go see Bart now. It was his only choice. At that moment, sealed memories were suddenly ripped open. It was a rainy night when he was 17. Back then, he had still been the heir of the Myers family. Who could have imagined that on that very night, everything he had once believed in without question would begin to collapse completely? A knock on the door suddenly sounded in the dead of night. If Bart came looking for him at this hour, it could not possibly mean anything good. Egan, however, looked very calm and told him to come in and speak. But seeing Bart in that state, Egan also began to feel uneasy. Coming so late at night, had something major happened? Yet after Bart entered the room, he stood there for a long while unable to say a single word. Something was obviously off about the atmosphere. What Bart said next was enough to shake the entire family. First, he emphasized that he had absolutely no ill intentions. Then he dropped a bombshell. Staring at Egan, he said word by word, "In truth, you are not the Duke and Duchess's biological child." The sentence struck like a bolt of thunder, freezing Egan where he stood. When he recovered himself, he immediately refuted it, feeling that Bart had gone completely mad. A joke like that went far too far. Seeing that Egan did not believe him, Bart directly pointed out where the evidence was hidden, in the tea Egan drank every morning. He said that something had been added to it, a drug that could quietly alter a person's hair color without anyone noticing. That left Egan with nothing to say. Though he refused to admit it aloud, from that day onward, he never dared to drink that cup of tea again. As he secretly poured the tea away, he kept praying to himself that everything Bart had said was nothing but lies. But when that streak of black appeared among the symbolic blonde hair of the Myers family, Egan knew that all lies had come to an end. This was undeniable proof. He could no longer sit still. He rushed straight to confront Bart. If his identity was false, then who were his real parents? But when he saw Bart, he froze. The once respectable doctor had now become a bloody prisoner. From behind the iron bars, Bart revealed a sinister smile. He said that this was the first time Egan had seen his true face. Watching the guards fall one by one, Bart knew at once that the visitor could not be an ordinary man. With a cold laugh from behind the bars, he directly called him by his true identity, "Your Highness the Prince." Bart, covered in blood, knew he did not have long to live. So he told Egan to ask what he wanted and not waste the little time left. Egan was silent for a moment before asking the question he had kept hidden for a long time. Since Bart had never been loyal, why had he made him leave the estate all those years ago? Bart laughed even more wildly at that. He mocked Egan, asking whether he was still fantasizing that he was the Duke's biological son. Did he not already know the answer in his own heart? Looking at the man before him, Bart laughed more and more madly. He said that Egan now looked exactly like the young emperor had once looked. Those things he had said 5 years ago had not contained a single lie. He had wanted Egan to know that royal blood flowed through his veins. But if that identity was real, then why had he so cruelly driven him away back then? Bart gave the cruelest answer possible. Because only then could Egan live in the most pain. It had never been salvation at all. It was a complete and utter curse. From that moment on, He had become that cursed prince. In the eyes of outsiders, anyone who could afford medical school must have come from a rich family. But who could have imagined that working at the ducal estate would be such a dream? As he drank fine liquor, Hyde remarked to Judith that not only did the Duke pay extremely well, he even covered the tuition for Hyde's younger siblings. Treatment like that was simply unbelievable. He thought the Duke of Mias was basically the best employer in the world. But if the ducal estate was so wonderful, why were the rumors outside so ugly? Lowering his voice, Hyde revealed that dangerous truth. Those nasty rumors had all been dirt thrown by the royal family from behind the scenes. Everyone knew that the royal family had always regarded the Mias family as a thorn in its side that had to be removed. Judith also knew that this was hardly any secret. Setting down his glass, Hyde brought up what had happened back then. At the time, the Duke and Duchess had been unable to have children. That should have been a private matter, yet the Emperor had taken the lead in mocking them behind their backs. Even worse, the Emperor had secretly opened a plea for help that the Duchess had written to the medical academy, then spread the contents so widely that the entire upper society knew of it. Such despicable tactics were not only meant to humiliate the ducal household, but also to ensure that they would never again be able to hold their heads high in society. After hearing all that, Judith felt that the Emperor truly had no bottom line at all. How could someone mock another person's most desperate wish like that? Although the matter gradually faded from memory after Aegon's birth, Judith knew very well that a wound like that could never truly be erased. What worried her most now was Hyde's true identity. She had to find his biological parents as quickly as possible. But with so many eyes around, there was no way for her to go discuss it with Aegon. Judith turned to look at Hyde. Although they had only just met, she had no choice now but to ask him for this favor. Judith finally found the right opportunity and tentatively asked Hyde whether he could help her with a small errand. She came up with the perfect excuse, saying that she wanted to send several letters of greeting, but since she still was not familiar with the servants at the estate, she hoped Hyde could help find someone reliable. Hyde agreed readily, and even volunteered to do it himself. Since he had to go out tomorrow to buy medicinal herbs anyway, he could deliver the letters on the way. Though Judith said aloud that she felt bad for troubling him, inwardly, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. As long as those letters were delivered smoothly, the next part of her plan would be much easier. The power of Judith's smile was simply too much. She sincerely apologized to Hyde, and the atmosphere instantly turned delicate. Hyde had never experienced anything like this before and was struck dumb on the spot. But before he could react, his body betrayed him first. A loud hiccup shattered the moment at once. The awkwardness peaked instantly. Judith thought he might be drunk, and Hyde could only seize the convenient excuse, hiccuping as he hurriedly took his leave. When Hyde pushed the door open and left, this serious discussion had finally been settled. Judith watched him go, feeling a huge weight lift off her chest. But the moment he was gone, the sobriety she had been forcing herself to maintain collapsed all at once. Judith felt the room spin as the alcohol rushed over her like a tide. She could not move a single step now, so she simply flopped down onto the carpet. Elegance, image, none of that mattered anymore. Feeling the softness of the carpet beneath her, Judith let out a long breath. Who would have thought that the room's rightful owner would push the door open at that exact moment? Seeing Judith collapsed on the floor, Aegon was instantly furious. He had never imagined this woman would dare to this extent. He stared coldly at Judith, his tone full of undisguised sourness, and demanded to know how much she had drunk with another man. What bothered him most was that the drinking session had actually taken place in his room, of all places. What was going on? The atmosphere today really fell off. It was the first time Judith had ever seen Aegon make that kind of expression. Had something happened? No. She had to get up and explain herself first. But what was wrong with her body? She could not summon any strength at all. Great. Now she was truly making a complete fool of herself. Judith desperately tried to stand, but her body simply would not cooperate. She slumped down like a boneless puddle. Aegon nearly laughed at the sight and remarked that if Judith kept this up, she would eventually be swallowed whole by that blanket. At this rate, it had probably eaten half of her already. All Judith could do was apologize awkwardly. Who would have thought that someone normally so capable would go completely limp after drinking too much. Ejin's tone did not sound good at all. He demanded to know how she could drink herself in such a state with a man she had only just met when she did not even know her own limits. Judith was unconvinced and muttered that he was not some stranger. They lived under the same roof and both worked to earn their keep. Weren't they basically colleagues? The word colleagues nearly made Ejin laugh from anger. With a cold face, he reminded Judith that at most it was only a transaction. They had never been colleagues. Hearing that made Judith feel even more wronged. She complained that Ejin's words were too hurtful and even wondered whether coming into the ducal estate together in the first place had also been just a business deal. Seeing that Ejin was about to continue twisting the knife, Judith finally cracked completely. Now Judith was truly panicking. She shouted for Ejin to help her, saying that if he did not move this blanket right now, she was going to suffocate and throw up. Ejin showed absolutely no mercy with his mouth, warning her not to dare vomit on someone else's bed, and adding a jab that if she was going to attend a business party of this sort, she should at least stay sober. Though he looked utterly disgusted, he still resigned himself and moved closer, planning to peel this cocoon open. As he worked, Ejin muttered that in his whole life, he had never encountered anything like this, having to rescue a blackout drunk from inside a blanket. Judith became much more obedient after that, and could only shrink into the blanket and apologize in a small voice. Seeing that she was still fidgeting inside, Ejin quickly stopped her, saying that if she kept moving, she would only wrap herself tighter. That finally made Judith too afraid to move at all, and she could only obediently submit. Was the alcohol still not out of her system? Judith kept feeling that the atmosphere was not quite right. Ejin's movements were clearly professional, with no extra thoughts behind them. Yet even the faintest touch of his gloved fingertips through the blanket made her feel strangely unsettled inside. Judith could only comfort herself in her heart, telling herself that it had to be because the room was too quiet, which was making everything feel oddly intense. But then another thought occurred to her. No matter how she looked at it, this scene was weird. She was lying on someone else's bed, and Ejin was personally peeling away the blanket layer by layer from her body. If anyone walked in and saw this, there would be no explaining it at all. Judith regretted it so much now that she wanted to bite her own tongue off. She should never have made that stupid remark. Trying to distract herself, she casually asked Ejin why he never drank alcohol. Ejin coldly replied, "Who drinks in this kind of heat?" Then he launched straight into a long lecture about not being deceived. He warned Judith never to trust men so easily, especially those who drank with her while currying favor at the same time. Judith still wanted to struggle a little and said that she had only happened to get along well with Hyde in conversation, so they had simply had a couple of drinks while talking. But Ejin saw through the truth at once. He reminded her that men with bad intentions were best at creating common ground so that she would lower her guard. This whole sermon made Judith's head pound, and she finally protested loudly, saying that no matter what, she was still an adult. So could he stop treating her like a child all the time? Ejin let out a helpless sigh and reminded her that she had only just come of age not long ago. Then he began questioning her about when she had even started drinking. Knowing she was in the wrong, Judith shrank into the bed and muttered in a small voice that today had actually only been the second time she had ever drunk. That only made Ejin angrier. He demanded to know how she could dare drink alone with a man when she did not even know her own alcohol tolerance. Even in the ducal estate, that was far too bold. Judith was so dizzy from being scolded that she simply gave up and covered her ears, begging him to stop chanting at her. Looking at the drunkard in front of him, Ejin could only helplessly support his forehead and let out a long sigh. Judith tentatively called a master. Though Ejin was still angry, he still answered her instinctively. Judith was probably truly drunk out of her mind, because she actually patted the space beside her and asked whether Ejin wanted to lie down too. The moment those words came out, Ejin's brain practically short-circuited. He could not believe his own ears. What exactly had this girl understood from everything they had just said? He absolutely had no improper or dark thoughts toward Judith. But in this atmosphere, it looked exactly as if Judith were the one harboring improper thoughts toward him. Judith hurriedly shook her head and denied it, saying her brain had just glitched and she definitely had not meant it like that. That sent Ejin over the edge. If she had not meant that, then why on earth had she invited him to lie down with her out of nowhere? Judith suddenly said softly that she had noticed Master seemed to have been in a bad mood lately. Egan had obviously not expected this drunken girl to see through what was in his heart. Judith went on speaking to herself. Though she did not know what exactly had happened, Egan had looked unhappy for a long time now. She felt that at times like this, two people ought to sit face to face and talk about anything at all. Unfortunately, she had no strength in her body right now, and even sitting up was hard. Judith gently added that Egan did not have to tell her any of the things that were troubling him. All he had to do was stay and chat with her. Faced with this sudden tenderness, Egan sank into a long silence. In the end, he could not refuse and obediently laid down beside Judith. Egan softly called Judith's name. After receiving an affirmative response, he solemnly warned her that she was never allowed to drink again in the future, especially not with that Dr. Hyde. Judith, however, clearly had not realized the seriousness of the issue yet and innocently asked why. Egan turned his head to look at her, his voice full of helplessness, and said that when she got drunk, she did things like this, casually letting men lie beside her. Any man would misunderstand. Instead of reflecting on herself, Judith just laughed carelessly. She even teased Egan in return, saying that after spending so much time together, had they really not built even that much basic trust? Judith sounded rather self-righteous as she said that she had only given him a little special treatment because someone's mood had been so terrible. Egan nearly laughed from exasperation and asked what kind of special treatment it was to let someone lie on another person's bed. Only then did Judith suddenly realize that this bed really was not hers. A bit guilty at once, she felt rather sorry toward the Duke, but she quickly rationalized it, saying that if the Duke felt it was unfair, then he could just come complain to her himself. At worst, she could apologize then. Seeing Judith look so utterly lacking in confidence, yet somehow still brazen, the tension in Egan's nerves finally eased. He could not help but laugh out loud. Looking at Egan's smiling face, Judith sounded full of relief. She said that he really looked handsome when he smiled. Even if they were only chatting about meaningless nonsense, as long as the two of them could stay together like this, his mood would gradually improve, right? Egan was silent for a moment before softly calling Judith's name. For the first time, he admitted that there had once been a period when he had thought he would never again be able to laugh sincerely like this for the rest of his life. But at some point, as long as he stayed by Judith's side, those smiles had somehow begun to return. He even began to feel that perhaps, on some subconscious level, he had always known that only with Judith could he find true salvation. That was why, just like now, he could not help but always want to draw closer to her. Egan showed a smile of approval and remarked that she really was clever after all. But as Judith looked at the man before her, she muttered inwardly that in truth, what she had just said had not been meant specifically for him. The reason she could comfort him was not because she was especially clever, but because she herself had gone through all that pain before. When she was little, whenever she was sick or unhappy, she always found herself thinking that if only there were someone beside her. Even if that person made life more burdensome, she still longed to have someone who could share those heavy burdens that came day after day. So when she had heard Hyde mention that he still had 7 younger siblings to care for, she had suddenly felt an unprecedented loneliness rise inside her, because she realized that she did not even have a single person she needed to take responsibility for, a single person she needed to protect. Maybe it was precisely because she had seen her once helpless self reflected in Egan that she could not help wanting to lend him a hand. Perhaps it was because of the alcohol, but that night I truly had become a little emotional. Looking at him, who had finally managed to smile, I found that I did not want him to just turn around and leave. So we lay there side by side and talked for a very, very long time, all of it meaningless nonsense. But when I opened my eyes again, there was already no one beside me. Only the blanket covering me still held a trace of warmth. I stretched and gradually woke up fully. Wait, I seem to have forgotten the most important thing. I had originally intended to ask him about the Zorn Marquis family, but we got so caught up talking last night that I forgot all about the real business. Still, it should be fine. After all, Hyde had said before that he would deliver that letter to them today on time. Since the letter had already been sent, all that remained was to see how the other side would respond. All the medicinal herbs have been purchased. This is the last letter Judith asked me to deliver. After hearing that he had resigned, those shop owners all looked especially disappointed. They were so enthusiastic that even I, who was only running errands for him, got stuffed with a huge slice of pie. It seems Judith's influence in this town is even greater than I imagined. That person really is so good that there's nothing bad to say about him, about her. Let me see the address on the last letter. It should be around here. The Intelligence Guild? She was actually involved with a place like this too? If this is the Intelligence Guild, then it must be the sort of place that buys and sells information. I just so happen to have something I've been very curious about too. Since I'm already at the door, I might as well ask while I'm here. If this really is an Intelligence Guild, then surely they also sell, at clearly marked prices, the secret to how to make yourself likable, right? The title of Cursed Prince had followed him for far too long, until this voice appeared and tore away the royal family's last veil of shame. Don't you want to know who your birth mother is? The figure hidden in the shadows sounded full of provocation. Every word that followed challenged Egan's limits. It turned out that the truth from back then was far filthier than anyone could have imagined. For the sake of his own desire, His Majesty the Emperor had forcibly taken possession of the last witch, and you are the sinful product of that act. A heavy fist slammed onto the table, but it could not shatter the disgust in his heart. This loathing toward his own existence had not been this intense in a very long time. It felt as though, in an instant, he had been dragged back into that dark past again. Those filthy truths corroded his reason like poison. If I had not seen Judith yesterday, I probably would not even have had the strength to keep sitting here now. In this abyss, she is the only reason I can stay sane. It feels like only a moment ago that bold little girl was still making a fuss about absolutely having to see me. Yet in the blink of an eye, I somehow already owe her 2 lives. This unspeakable feeling is quietly growing wild inside me. And what exactly is this feeling supposed to be? Damn it. Why am I thinking about Judith again? These uncontrollable thoughts simply will not stop. A voice came from outside the door, sounding somewhat uneasy, saying that someone had brought something for the master. Wait, why does that voice sound so familiar? That familiar tone. There was no mistake. It had to be that person. Hyde set down his teacup and let out a sigh of relief, saying that the guards outside were so strict he had almost thought he would not be allowed in today. Egan, on the other hand, looked completely calm. Very few distinguished guests had ever been received by him in person, but since it was a letter sent by Judith, that naturally made it different. To him, Judith was no ordinary client. She was the most special one of all. Hearing that, Hyde's expression became meaningful. It seemed other patrons had received exactly the same evaluation too. It had to be said, Judith really was flawlessly skilled at winning people's hearts. Looking at the man in front of him, his immaculately groomed hair, and those green eyes even darker than Judith's. His posture was proper, every gesture more elegant than a noble's, and yet his personality was still so unrestrained. The more Hyde looked at him, the more annoyed he became. What if Judith happened to like exactly this sort of type? After all, she had once said with her own mouth that compared to someone gloomy, she preferred cheerful and friendly people. Great. Wasn't that basically calling me out by name? Sensing that something was off in the atmosphere, Hyde tentatively asked whether he should step out first and leave some private space for the master. Egan quickly stopped him and told him to sit on the sofa for a while. He would read the letter and write a reply right away. Since Judith had specifically asked someone to deliver a letter, it must surely contain some matter she wanted to warn him about. When he opened the envelope, it turned out she wanted him to help investigate the whereabouts of the Marquis and Marchioness Orden. For him, that kind of intelligence was not difficult to uncover at all. He just could not quite understand why Judith had suddenly set her sights on 2 people who seemed to have no connection to anything. Just when their conversation had more or less run its course, Hyde abruptly changed topics and asked whether this place really sold information. After getting a positive answer, he suddenly became a little shy and said that there was someone he cared about deeply. Though they had not known each other for very long, she was beautiful and gentle, the kind of girl anyone would fall for. Unfortunately, he had almost no practical experience when it came to romance. So he wanted to consult an expert about how he could approach her without seeming too abrupt. Listening to his rival praise his wife to his face and then ask him to teach him how to pursue her, Egan nearly snapped the pen in his hand. With a sharp crack, the fountain pen in Egan's hand actually broke cleanly in two. The sudden menace of it made Hyde's heart skip a beat. He felt as though he had asked the wrong question. Asking how to pursue a girl in a place this serious really was a little too awkward. After all, this was an information house, a place that specialized in trading secrets. The atmosphere here was clearly different from outside. Though it stood in a bustling district, the building was overly hidden, and even seeing the owner in person was difficult. Not to mention this masked man, who radiated pressure from head to toe, and whose voice was so ordinary it was impossible to remember. Such deliberate concealment of his identity was clearly the mark of someone handling major business. The more Hyde thought about it, the more inappropriate he felt he had been, so he hurriedly waved his hands and said they could just pretend he had never asked. He thought the matter was over, but Egan suddenly stood up and firmly insisted on continuing the conversation. Not only did he agree to help, he was going to give Hyde a reading on the spot and tell him whether this relationship had any chance at all. Before Hyde could even react, the next words out of Egan's mouth stunned him on the spot. In a flat tone, Egan asked, "The first time you met that girl was at the Myers ducal estate, wasn't it?" This time it was Hyde's turn to be dumbstruck. How had this masked man learned such a private matter, something only the people involved could know, when he had not even said the girl's name? Egan pressed on step by step and directly exposed Hyde's identity, saying that he was the private doctor of the ducal estate. He not only knew Hyde's real name, but also that he had been the most outstanding graduate of his class at the medical academy. Even the minor detail that someone around him had only recently resigned was known to this man with complete clarity. Hyde was utterly stunned. Information known only to a tiny handful of people, even information that could be considered confidential, was in front of this man as transparent as glass. There were no secrets at all. Before Hyde could recover from a shock, Egan delivered the final verdict. "Since you asked about the outcome of this relationship, my advice is only this. You'd best give up on the girl you like as soon as possible." Egan's words were like icy water, extinguishing Hyde's fantasies in an instant. He said the girl only regarded him as a colleague. Hyde clearly was not ready to give up and asked whether there really was not even the slightest chance of getting a little closer. Egan answered cleanly that it was simply impossible because Hyde was not her type at all. That angered Hyde terribly. Was a hard-working, handsome man like him really still not enough? Faced with Hyde's confidence in himself, Egan merely let out a cold laugh and said that he was not so sure about that. Egan sighed and bluntly said that the present environment simply was not suited for romance. Hyde lowered his head and said he understood all of that, which was why he had planned to slowly work his way in, getting closer little by little without putting pressure on her. But Egan did not buy any of it. He coldly emphasized once more that no matter how much effort Hyde spent, it would still be useless because Hyde simply was not her type. That completely left Hyde at a loss. He might not have any experience in love, but he was still confident in his own appearance. He could not help trying to sell himself, saying that objectively speaking, he was not ugly, right? Some people had even praised him by saying that his face was exactly the kind all women liked. That self-assured attitude only made Egan more irritated. Though inwardly, he had to admit that the man really was quite attractive. That very fact only irritated him more. Egan then threw out his trump card, saying that nobles usually only valued other nobles. That left Hyde completely stunned. He told Hyde to face reality. Isn't the girl you like a noble herself? In her standards for a partner, the minimum would be a viscount, perhaps even a count or above. Only a man with that kind of status would be seen by her as a man at all. Otherwise, you do not even qualify to enter the game. Hyde still wanted to object, feeling that things might not be as Egan said. But Egan gave him no chance. He said there were no exceptions in this world. Had Hyde not seen enough of that back in medical school? Those words hit a sore spot, and Hyde fell completely silent, because he knew it was the truth. In the face of an absolute class system, sincerity and appearance truly seemed to become worthless. Egan stood up and asked whether this consultation had been sufficient. He had something more important to deal with now, namely Judith's request. Hyde could only nod obediently and say he would carry the reply back to her. Just as Hyde was about to take out money and ask how much the information fee would be, Egan waved it off and refused. After all, as Judith's colleague, he ought to show this much consideration. At the end, he did not forget to add one more pointed remark. saying that he and Judith shared a very special relationship. This medicinal tea was specially prepared for Carl. The toxins in his body had built up for too long, so it would still take some time to fully remove them. As long as he drank it every morning and evening, his body would gradually recover. The Duke finally let out a sigh of relief, grateful that Carl's attending physician was Hyde. He said he would remember this kindness. But Hyde acted very humbly, saying that he had only done his duty. The person who truly deserved thanks was actually the young Duchess Judith. What exactly had Judith done to earn such praise, even from the doctor? Isabella also nodded in agreement, admitting that if not for Judith this time, the consequences truly would have been unimaginable. The child was both bold and careful. If someone else had noticed something strange, they might very well have chosen to turn a blind eye. Listening from the side, the Duke felt secretly delighted. Clearly everyone was praising Judith. Yet, as an elder, he somehow felt especially honored himself. After the doctor left, Isabella looked at the tea in the cup and began making new plans. A woman as outstanding as Judith, even if it was to be a second marriage, absolutely could not simply be married off to some ordinary man. It seemed the standard for her future marriage would have to be raised. Isabella had already declared that Judith's future husband had to be at least a viscount. In fact, even a viscount might not be enough. They would have to choose a suitable count. Hearing those words, Hyde silently walked out of the hall. He could not help mocking himself. Had he simply been too greedy? Someone like Judith ought to live in a grand mansion all her life. He was only a commoner. Their statuses were worlds apart, and on top of that, he still had younger siblings to care for. To him, that was a responsibility, but to Judith, it would only be an unbearable burden. Thinking of that, Hyde's steps grew much heavier. Was this unspoken affection destined to remain buried in his heart? His mind was full of Judith's smiling face. He felt truly foolish for having ever entertained such an illusion, thinking there might be some special spark between them. In truth, Judith was kind to everyone. That gentleness and thoughtfulness. Perhaps it was merely the pity of someone in a higher position toward a commoner. Reality was far crueler than ideals. A wild thought suddenly flashed through his mind. If I were not a commoner, if I also possessed an illustrious noble status, would everything be different? But the thought frightened him almost at once. How could such a rebellious idea have appeared in his mind? Hyde shook his head hard, trying to cast away these fantasies. But once a seed has been planted, can it really be uprooted so easily? Hyde quickly forced himself to calm down. He told himself that no matter how hard life became, he had to walk steadily forward with both feet on the ground. Since status could not be crossed, then he would protect that girl in another way. He decided that he would become the most trustworthy friend Judith could have. Even if all he could do was bring her a hangover remedy when she was drunk, that would still be better than indulging in vain self-pity. Looking at the flowers in the garden, Hyde finally felt at peace. Even if he had no chance of ever becoming her lover in this lifetime, they could still become each other's strongest support. Perhaps this kind of pure friendship would last longer than love. Hyde had made his choice, but could such gentle self-settlement really make him give up completely? A knock sounded from outside the door. Judith answered casually, and Hyde appeared in the room on time, carrying a tray. Seeing the private doctor, Judith was a little puzzled. She had already taken her morning medicine on time. Hyde smiled and explained that this had been specially prepared for her. Hearing that, Carl immediately grew tense. He hurried over at once, afraid that Judith might be feeling unwell somewhere. After all, just moments ago, he had been seriously reading out loud from a prenatal education book. As Carl urged Judith to listen to the doctor and receive proper treatment, he also patted his chest and promised that if there was anything he could help with, he would absolutely do it. Looking at Carl's obedient yet nervous little face, Judith felt warmth spread through her heart. Smiling, Judith gently stroked Carl's little head and said that she really enjoyed listening to him read. As for the medicine Hyde had brought, it was not because she was sick. Hyde added from the side that it was only medicine to relieve nausea. Carl was quick to react. He blurted out, "Morning sickness?" His response even surprised Judith a little. Hyde could not help praising him, saying that the young master was truly well-informed. Looking proud, Carl declared that he had already read all about this in books. Hugging his book tightly, he asked with complete seriousness whether his sister-in-law's morning sickness was severe. He had heard that some people suffered so badly they could not even eat a single bite. Seeing how worried Carl looked, Judith's heart softened completely. She gently comforted him, saying that fortunately it was not very serious. Only then did Carl let out a sigh of relief. Being so considerate at such a young age, he was bound to grow up into a very warm-hearted man. Hyde handed over the medicine and patiently reminded her that it worked very well for either a hangover or nausea. Hearing the doctor say that, Judith finally felt reassured. Smiling, she accepted the tray and was just about to drink the medicine when Hyde pulled an envelope from his coat and said that this concerned the matter Judith had previously asked him to handle. Since he happened to be going into town anyway, he had brought it back with him on the way. Clutching the envelope tightly, Judith thanked Hyde again and again. Seeing how happy he was, Hyde only replied mildly that this was all something he ought to do, so there was no need to be so polite. The matter Judith had privately asked him to help with had finally found a lead. Hyde silently resolved that he would focus on what he could do. He clenched his fists tightly. After all, in front of Judith he had always been that most trustworthy good friend. Night soon fell. Judith sat alone in her room and opened the envelope Hyde had brought. The information inside was crucial. The Marquis and Marchioness Zordon had officially arrived in the capital. They had gone to such great lengths this time for one reason only: to attend the banquet being held at the Imperial Palace later this month. The arrival of these unexpected guests had clearly disturbed the former calm. Judith had already made up her mind. The upcoming palace banquet was probably not going to pass peacefully. Egan had written in the letter that he hoped this information would be of help, but as Judith read it, she felt a little puzzled. Why had the tone between the lines suddenly become so polite? It was practically like he had turned into a different person. But this was no time to dwell on that. She casually held the letter over the candle flame and watched it turn to ash in the fire. Since the Marquis couple had arrived in the capital, the next part of the plan would be much easier. But the most troublesome problem now was how to let them know that Hyde was their missing eldest son. Judith imagined herself rushing straight over and saying, "I know where your son is." She would probably be thrown out as a fraud before she even finished the sentence. After all, news from an unknown source like that really did sound suspicious. The only reason she had managed to convince Isabella before was because of that excuse about a prophetic dream. But the Marquis couple did not know her at all, so that trick obviously would not work. Judith fell into deep thought. What method could she use to make them discover the truth on their own? Was there any way to pass the information to the Marquis couple naturally? Ideally, she could make use of the plot from the Aid novel. Just as she was at a complete loss, a flash of inspiration struck her. She really had thought of something. In the original storyline, whenever the Marquis couple came to the capital, they had one unchanging habit. They would always visit the temple of the last shaman. That temple stood in a remote place and had long been shrouded in mystery. The reason they went there every time was to pray there, hoping that one day their missing eldest son would return safely. Now that she had this information, Judith instantly had an idea. As long as she set things up in advance at the temple, there was no need to worry that they would not take the bait. But was this shaman temple really as easy to approach as the novel made it sound? The woman named Chaska was the final heir of that mysterious tribe. It was said that she possessed an extraordinary ability to see through the future, the power of prophecy. After the tribe declined, she came alone to the empire and voluntarily requested citizenship. The only condition she asked in exchange was that a temple of her own be built outside the capital. But then something strange happened. From the day the temple was completed, she never stepped outside its doors again. She had never even displayed any prophetic ability in front of others. It was as though she had completely locked herself inside that cage. Then in the end, she vanished into thin air without leaving a single trace. The disappearance of this shaman caused a tremendous uproar at the time, and the entire capital fell into uneasy speculation. Rumors spread everywhere, saying that the shaman was actually a witch and that she was carrying a demon's child. But just as the gossip reached its peak, strange things began to happen at the temple. The incense there never went out, and the flowers around it never withered. Everyone who tried to tear the temple down ended up going mad for no reason. This eerie power of intimidation only made the temple even more famous. A place once regarded as ominous had become a holy site for believers. Every day, people came there by reputation alone, hoping to obtain even the slightest bit of protection. And the most important point was that the marquee couple were among them. Their obsession with this place far exceeded anything ordinary people could imagine. As long as they entered the capital, they would certainly go to the temple to pray. Judith looked out the window, already calculating. Since they were going to the temple, then this was the best opportunity. If the marquee couple went there to pray for their son's return, then Judith had no intention of politely ignoring such an obvious weakness. She decided to step in personally. Judith's plan was very simple. The first step was to seize the initiative by sneaking into the temple before the marquee couple arrived. As for the second step, that was when her acting skills would come into play. Inside the temple, right in front of the couple, she would pretend to have received a divine revelation. Judith had already thought it through. When the time came, she would pretend to hear the shaman's guidance within the temple, and then publicly reveal the secret, telling that pitiful couple, "The son you have searched for so desperately is actually living in Maya's territory as a doctor." As long as she invoked Chaska's name, those words would take on a sacred aura. To make the performance even more convincing, she planned to tie in the previous lie as well. Since she had already told Isabella that she often had prophetic dreams, this was the perfect chance to make use of it. As long as she said she had dreamed of the temple, Isabella definitely would not suspect anything. After all, in everyone's eyes, Judith was now someone under special protection. Judith intended to use that as an excuse and openly declare that she wanted to go to the temple to pray for safety and blessings for the non-existent child in her belly. The excuse was practically flawless. It would not only allow her to go out openly, but also let her toy with everyone in the palm of her hand. As Judith was mulling over her plan, a dull knocking suddenly came from behind the bookshelf. Recognizing Egan's voice, she had no choice but to let him in. But as she watched the bookshelf slowly move aside, she felt a little irritated. If he had business, he could have written a letter. Why insist on using this secret passage? Even if he knew where the hidden passage was, he could not just come and go whenever he pleased, could he? Although she was currently under his care, Judith felt this kind of boundaryless behavior needed to be discussed. Once the bookshelf had opened completely, Egan stepped out with a calm expression and immediately asked whether she had received that letter. Judith replied pleasantly that she had received it, but why had his grace come in person as well? Judging by his manner, what Egan wanted to say was probably not so simple. Seeing Judith act so businesslike, Egan could not help teasing her. The moment they met, she talked about official matters. Did they really have nothing else to discuss besides work? He had meant to ease the atmosphere, but Judith did not even lift her head and answered with a single word, "Correct." The reply was swift, precise, and merciless. She did not leave him any face at all. Egan, who had been smiling just a moment ago, froze on the spot. He even began reflecting on whether he had done something wrong. Judith's logic was impeccable. She said she was not exactly angry. She just thought the Duke was being too overbearing. Egan tried to make excuses, asking if she was worried the secret passage might be discovered. But Judith shot back with a question of her own. If someone wandered around your house at will, would you not find it creepy too? That single sentence was a direct hit. It completely stunned Egan. Whatever his original intentions had been, this method clearly would not work anymore. Judith smiled and delivered her final notice. If he wanted to meet her in the future, he could go through proper channels and make an appointment. This time it was Egan's turn to be dumbfounded. Professionals. Then how were they supposed to meet in private after this? When Judith mentioned having Hyde deliver letters, Egan turned thoroughly sour. Had that doctor become closer to her than he was now? Judith answered honestly enough. After all, they were living under the same roof. Those words made Egan feel even worse, yet he could not find any reason to refute them. Just as Judith was about to end the meeting, she casually mentioned that if she wanted to go out, she would first have to ask Mother for permission. That one word, Mother, caught Egan completely off guard. He had clearly not expected their relationship to have progressed this far. Judith, however, thought it was only natural. Since it was her mother-in-law's own request, she could hardly keep stiffly calling her the Duchess forever. Seeing how naturally Judith said it, Egen could only silently accept reality. Judith spoke her honest feelings aloud. Compared to her birth mother, her mother-in-law now actually made her feel warmer and more cared for. Although put like that, it did sound a little strange. She gave a self-mocking smile, wondering whether saying something like that made her seem too unconventional. Unexpectedly, Egen was not surprised at all. In an even tone, he mentioned that a birth mother and an adoptive mother had always been two different people to him. Besides, he had only recently learned who his birth mother really was. So to him, this sort of complicated relationship was perfectly normal. That frank confession added a faint sense of shared misery to the once awkward atmosphere. If he had only recently learned the truth, then was it that day? Judith recalled that moment. At the time, Egen had looked as though he had completely shattered. That was why she had not dared ask anything. But even now that she knew the reason, she still did not know what she could possibly say to comfort this man covered in wounds. After all, this man had never been used to showing others his vulnerable side. A light cough broke the silence. Egen seemed unwilling to continue this heavy topic any further. He turned to leave and casually asked, "Where are you planning to go next?" Only then did Judith come back to herself. Judith gave him the destination. She planned to visit the last priestess, the temple. Hearing that answer, Egen fell silent. He clearly did not understand what she intended to do in a place like that, and could not help asking what reason she had for going there. Judith put on a devout expression and said she was going there to pray for the child in her belly. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt a little guilty because this so-called child was nothing but a non-existent lie. Egen was obviously not so easy to fool. He stopped his tracks and said bluntly that no one had ever received a response from that temple. Going there would be a complete waste of time. He even asked with a trace of scrutiny whether this trip was some duty she had to fulfill as the Duchess's daughter-in-law. Faced with a tone that was almost interrogative, Judith did not back down. She fell silent for a moment, then called out to stop him in a calm voice. She directly reminded Egen that she had no obligation to report all of her movements to him, especially not with this kind of interrogation room attitude. He did not have the right to boss her around now. Since theirs was only a contractual relationship, then the best thing to do was keep proper boundaries. Neither of them should think about crossing the line lightly. Faced with Judith's firmness, Egen astonishingly admitted his mistake for once and said that his curiosity had overstepped. But before the atmosphere could soften, he followed up with another cutting remark. He said Judith was acting far too much like a member of this family. Her excessive involvement was making it difficult even for him to tell whether the woman before him was a contractor or truly one of them. Judith caught the probing intent beneath his words. She showed no sign of panic, only answered lightly, "So that's what it is." Following his lead, she once again emphasized her identity. Since she was only an employee being paid to do a job, then indeed she should not act so concerned. After saying that, she left without looking back. Judith wrapped her hand around the doorknob. Since she was just an employee, then even something as small as going out should be cleared with the boss first. But when she was alone in the corridor, Judith suddenly stopped walking. The forceful posture she had shown just now vanished without a trace. She could not help beginning to reflect on whether she had been too emotional a moment ago. It was supposed to be nothing more than a transaction, but her reaction had seemed to go beyond the bounds of professionalism. As Judith walked, she muttered to herself, feeling that Egen had been rather strange today too. They argued sometimes, but the atmosphere of today's conversation had clearly been off. She pushed all the blame onto him, deciding it was Egen's fault for insisting over and over that she was just a fake. But once she calmed down and thought about it, what he said was not exactly wrong. Sooner or later, she would have to leave this place. Judith suddenly realized that the reason she had become so angry might be because somewhere in her subconscious, she actually wanted to stay here a little longer. That attachment she should not have felt left her somewhat at a loss. Heavy rain suddenly began to fall outside. The dense raindrops beat against the window curtains, helping Judith calm down quite a bit. She thought to herself, That what she had said just now had probably startled him too. Looking at the blurred, rainy scene before her, she made up her mind in secret. The next time they met, she would definitely find a chance to talk to him properly. She could not keep acting on impulse like this. When Hyde came to me for advice about the person he liked, I deliberately used status and rank against him to crush his hopes. I used the cruelest words possible and trampled all over his sincere feelings. When I saw the look on his face as he gave up, I even felt relieved, as if I had finally solved a troublesome problem. But that sense of relief did not last long. A nameless anxiety soon swallowed me whole, because I knew very well that Hyde Ramis was different from me. He had the right to stand openly at that person's side. But I could only hide in the shadows like this, unable even to approach except as an impossible wish. In other people's eyes, he was a handsome and sincere man. Precisely because he knew this marriage was fake, he could sit and drink with Judith without hesitation whenever she was upset. Compared to him, I was nothing but a strange man with an unclear identity, yet I still interfered in every detail of her life like some foolish husband. I had almost forgotten. Without the identity of Aegon Myas, I had no right at all to call myself her husband. If I stripped off that disguise, I would not even have the courage to stand in front of her. Actually, I did not mean to push Judith that far. It was just that when I heard her say she was going to the temple, I lost control of my emotions for a moment. Thinking back on that argument just now, she must have been frightened too. I think I still need to find her and talk things through properly. Since this started because of me, I should be the one to resolve it. I plan to go to the temple right now. Once I see her, I'll apologize first. Just as I was about to leave, the attendant behind me asked, "Master, are you going out?" I casually picked up an umbrella and told him I'll be back soon. Since I had already made up my mind, there was no reason to drag things out. In truth, after hearing Bart's words, I had always been resistant to going to that place. I felt as though I was not yet mentally prepared. But thanks to Judith, I finally took this step. Perhaps all of this had been arranged by fate. The heavy rain washed over the streets as I walked alone beneath my umbrella, looking at that building in the distance glowing with a faint violet light. So the long-standing rumors were true. Those flickering purple candles, even in rain like this, had not gone out at all. A long line stretched outside the temple. Even though no one had ever received an answer, none of them were willing to leave. It seemed that when people were truly driven into desperation, they really would take emptiness for salvation. Among the silhouettes praying there, I recognized the Marquis and Marchioness Zordon at a glance. More than 10 years ago, they lost their son, and even now they were still searching desperately for him. Just as I expected, Judith had come here in order to get close to that couple. She seemed to have calculated her position in advance. She was dressed very plainly today and had deliberately put on a veil. She was even carrying an enormous umbrella. Clearly, she did not want to attract anyone's attention. This was probably Mother's idea. Before formally announcing the pregnancy, she wanted Judith to stay as low-key as possible to avoid unnecessary trouble. I suppose the news would be personally announced by Mother at the upcoming imperial banquet. She had always loved grand occasions like that. But wait, wasn't the way I was acting right now a little too strange? Hiding in the dark, secretly watching her, analyzing things to myself. No matter how I looked at it, I seemed like some suspicious stalker. No, this wasn't stalking. I just didn't want to disturb Judith, so I was waiting here for her. Once she came out of the temple, I would find a suitable moment to go over and greet her. That would seem more natural. But before I could finish thinking it through, a huge purple bolt of lightning suddenly split the sky, accompanied by deafening thunder. The bolt shot straight toward the temple, instantly swallowing the entire building. Those candles that were said never to go out, that even torrential rain could not extinguish, all went out in that single instant. A wave of commotion broke out in the crowd. Everyone whispered in terror that such a sign had never appeared at the temple before. Could it really be that the final priestess had sent down a curse? At a moment like this, there was no time to worry about curses. If the candles had gone out, then something major must have happened inside the temple. I threw away my umbrella and rushed straight into the downpour. Judith was still inside. I had to confirm her safety at once. The word curse sounded truly ironic right now. I rammed myself against the temple doors over and over, but it felt as though some invisible force was stopping me from advancing. Was tormenting me alone still not enough to satisfy you? Did you have to drag innocent people into this disaster too? Stop making jokes like this. No matter how much you hate me, you should not vent your resentment this way. Even if all misfortune were to fall upon me, I would accept it, but at least spare the person inside. If you truly are my mother, if you are still watching all of this, then please show mercy and stop. As the heir of the Maya's family, Ijin had once possessed everything others longed for. An illustrious family, loving parents, and an adorable younger brother. In outsiders' eyes, it was practically a perfect life. He had once believed that as long as the crown prince ascended the throne, all conflicts would be resolved, and he too would steadily inherit the family. But just when his position seemed most secure, the family doctor, Bart, brought him a piece of news late one night that he simply could not accept. Bart lowered his voice and said, "Young master, you're not the Duke's biological son at all." To prove he was not lying, Bart also told him that as long as he stopped drinking the tea he was given every day, the truth would reveal itself. In that moment, Ijin's world completely collapsed. Not long afterward, Bart's words came true. Black hair began growing among Ijin's signature golden hair. That meant he did not carry the blood of the Maya's family at all. Bart then handed him 2 medical records. One belonged to Duchess Isabella, and the other to Ijin himself. Pointing at the records, Bart said that there was a full 10-month blank period in the Duchess's case history. During that time, the family had been traveling on Bart Island. It was on that island that they found an abandoned infant, and they stayed there for 2 more years before returning to the capital with the child. Bart stared at Ijin and said, "That child they picked up was you." That was why the records did not match. It was absurdly ironic. Bart continued piling on the evidence. He said Ijin's rate of development back then had been far too fast to be normal. Ijin could not listen anymore. He slammed a hand on the table and stood up, saying, "Enough. I'll ask my parents myself." But Bart's next words rooted him to the spot. Lowering his voice, Bart said, "You are not an ordinary child. Royal blood runs through your veins." To prove this astonishing secret, Bart told him that all members of the imperial family blessed by the moon shared one common trait. If they bled beneath moonlight, something unbelievable would happen. Ijin took the dagger Bart handed him and slashed hard across his own arm. The blade cut through his skin, and blood instantly splattered across the floor. But what happened next left Ijin utterly stunned. Looking at his arm, Bart said, "That's right. For those blessed by the moon, wounds disappear automatically under moonlight. This is an ability possessed only by royal blood." Now that the evidence was right before him, there was no denying it. Bart stepped forward, his tone turning icy. He said he was the only person who knew the truth, and what he said next stabbed like a knife. Staring at him, Bart said, "Out of loyalty, I must warn you of one thing. Do not use your royal blood to stain the Maya's family." And so, carrying overwhelming guilt, Ijin completely left the Maya's family behind. At the time, he believed it was his royal blood that had soiled the family's name. He had even felt grateful to Bart, thinking that if Bart had not exposed the truth, he would have ruined the entire house. But who could have imagined that all of it had been an elaborately woven trap? A full 5 years later, Ijin finally discovered that he had been made a fool of. Bart had never been loyal in the first place. Ijin had gone straight to him, demanding a real explanation. But when they met again, Bart only stood behind iron bars, wearing a smile that made one's skin crawl. He called Ijin the cursed prince. Lowering his voice, Bart asked, "Aren't you even a little curious about who your birth mother really was?" What Bart said next struck Ijin like a bolt of thunder. He said that the emperor of those days had forcibly taken the last shamaness, and that shamaness was Ijin's birth mother. After giving birth to him, she used her life to cast a vicious curse. She declared that in the near future, the emperor would die by the hand of his own son. The emperor was terrified. He originally intended to eliminate the disaster immediately, but before the shamaness died, she added one more sentence. Whoever dared kill this child would suffer the same curse. The emperor grew fearful and ultimately did not dare carry through with the murder. He ordered his attendants to dispose of the child, but the servant had a moment of compassion and merely cast him into the sea. And what happened then? He drifted all the way to Bard Island, where the Duke and Duchess found him and took him in. That was how he became the Aegeon of today. Most ironic of all, whether it was the present emperor or the ducal couple who raised him, all of them had known this entire chain of ugly truths. So all along, his whole life had been built on one enormous lie. With a cold laugh, Bart said that the ducal couple had hidden it from him because they truly loved him as their own son. But the emperor had merely stood by and watched, waiting for him to destroy that family with his own hands. Aegeon suddenly interrupted him. If you and the emperor both wanted me to inherit the title, then why did you drive me away 5 years ago? Bart let out a sigh and said that yes, originally that had indeed been the plan, until he realized something was wrong. At first, I was ordered to poison them. Once the entire Maius family was dead, I would gain the Emperor's absolute trust. But ever since you appeared, all the plans were thrown into chaos. The Emperor suddenly halted the poisoning because he had thought of an even more twisted idea. He wanted to watch with his own eyes as the Maius family was dragged into hell by the son they loved most. This was no longer simple revenge. The emperor wanted to kill the heart as well as the body, to make Aegeon live in agony forever. Bart continued, "At first, I didn't think it would be a problem. I naturally assumed the Duke and Duchess would never truly accept you. Once their biological son, Carl, was born, your good days would be over. But I never imagined they would never once think of sending you away. You just kept growing up day by day in their love, from a child into the young man you are now. I started to panic. Again and again, I petitioned the emperor. I told him there was no way you would ever kill the Duke. We had to resume the poisoning plan immediately. But what was the result? The emperor didn't listen to me at all. Later on, he even stopped replying to my letters. At that moment, I finally realized that in the emperor's eyes, I too had become a useless pawn." Aegeon looked at him coldly and asked in a low voice, "So is that why, 5 years ago, you were determined to drive me out of my home?" Bart admitted it frankly. "Yes. At the time, I really did want you gone as soon as possible. I just never expected that sending you away would actually turn out to be a good thing." He gave a self-mocking laugh. "It seems I've finally earned the emperor's favor after all. The blade he was originally going to use to destroy the Maius family disappeared, and I happened to take its place. Wouldn't you say it's quite an interesting story? Things are going more smoothly than I expected." Holding her umbrella, Judith walked through the mist. She had successfully lined up ahead of the Marquis couple, and because of the heavy rain, there were far fewer people than usual. Judith had already decided what to do. Once she came out of the temple, she would say she had received a divine oracle. In any case, the people who came here to pray would surely believe it. Still, was it really all right to casually borrow the Holy Maiden's name like this? What if heaven truly punished her for it? Forget it. This was no time to lose her nerve. Her intentions were good. After all, surely the Holy Maiden would understand. Besides, she had already endured mountains of debt. What else was there to fear? Compared to having no money, divine punishment did not seem nearly as terrifying. When she pushed open the heavy doors, the scene inside the temple made her freeze. She had heard the place was unattended, yet it was unbelievably clean, especially those candles that supposedly never went out. They gave off an indescribably eerie feeling. Could it be that there really was some mysterious power here? This was bad. The moment she stepped inside, the candle that was supposed to burn forever went out right in front of Judith's eyes. That would make anyone panic. Without another word, Judith dropped to her knees with a thud and began kowtowing as she begged for mercy. "Lady Holy Maiden, please don't hold it against me." She was guilty as hell inside. Only moments ago, she had been planning to use the woman's name to swindle people, and now the retribution had come so fast. She could only keep explaining that she had truly been driven into a corner and had no choice. Just then, a violent wind suddenly rose outside, and the doors slammed loudly under its force. Judith thought it was only bad weather, and began worrying that she might end up trapped in here. Then an ethereal voice suddenly sounded by her ear. "We finally meet Judith Aylin." Judith's entire body went rigid. She had only come here to try her luck, but the Holy Maiden had actually appeared. Before Judith could even begin to explain, the other woman softly asked first, "Do you really know who I am?"